Oh, wait.
Do it.
Okay. I muted you again, fucker.
Yeah, I know, you bastard. I was actually just trying to give you like actual good details. It says we've been live for almost 7 minutes.
Welcome to the Legends of Tabletop podcast.
Don't do that. You'll blow this place up.
Guest host. All right. Hello and welcome to the Legends of Tabletop podcast. We're going to be talking about core tonight. And it feels weird because we don't do like interviews or roundtables anymore. I have no dice in front of me. I have no character sheets up. It's a very weird feeling to be here at the computer recording and having none of the accoutrement of
my table is not even round. I didn't have to tell you, but I'm telling you. It's square. Sorry.
I think Todd was going to do some downtime rolls for us all before we get started. I was on the divorced end of the thing.
Oh yeah, well I rolled mine. No, I have 21 cats. 21 cats.
Oh, hey, there you go. So you've downsized.
A little bit. Got rid of 2 of them.
Nice. So this is going to be a free-form sort of thing. We are talking about core. Everybody here has a project out or something coming out soon. Adventure-wise, maybe, probably, possibly. Kevin, I'm looking at you, but that's fine. We should probably start. Kevin, you're clicking, and I hate it. What is
that?
Happening?
That was me.
You?
Sorry. Reconnected my mic.
All right. I'll have to edit
Didn't think you would hear it, man. Nothing gets past you.
I am crazy for the sound. It's awful. All right.
My head is off to you. My hair is off.
If you're wondering where one of the cats went, it's in the DNA recombiner from the fly, and John is actually part cat.
Yeah, you can see my ears going.
Wow, I disconnected my cable for 2 seconds and I'm completely lost now.
Classic Legends of Tabletop.
Right. All right, we'll circle back around. We'll bring you back in, Todd. So, Todd, tell us, what is core? How is it developed? How did you come about this system? What was your intentions? We can throw like 10 questions out and see how many you remember.
Well, they're all kind of like origin story questions. And I mean, I can say, what is core? I can give you a short answer to that. Okay. So core is a hybrid that is traditional / narrativist, minimalist role-playing game system, which is, every role-playing game system has its own feel. Core is designed for a lot of interplay, what I call psychic content, that is spontaneous generation of story content between players and GMs. So the narrative control gets kicked back and forth a lot, and very little prep is necessary because sort of, that hybrid zone. Let me give you an imaginary diagram, like a sort of a Venn diagram thing. In a classical traditional role-playing game, you've got a circle where the GM controls everything in the world, and you've got a smaller circle where you, the PC, control everything about your PC. And, to a degree, the GM doesn't really have a right to tell you something about your PC if you don't agree to it, but you don't have the right to tell the GM anything about the world unless the GM, feels like being, beneficent that evening or whatever, right? So those 2 circles really don't touch. The player sphere of control is personal. The GM sphere of control is like everything else in the world except for the player's personal life. And then you get your story games where they decided, hey, the role of the GM can be split up around the table and divided. Everybody can help control narrative flow. And yeah, that's true. And when we get games like, Fiasco, for instance, just to pull one out of my head, but there's many, many, many. Those 2 circles sort of blend into one circle. Now everybody shares all the same roles, rules, and responsibilities as both player and GM. Okay, so the core approach, and there are hybrids too, but I've been doing this since 2014. This is the thought that's been very forefront in my mind while working on this system over time, is to deliberately head right down the middle to a place where those two circles are still distinct. There is the realm of the GM and there is the realm of the player, but they overlap. And it's sort of a matter of your personal style, how much you want to let them overlap. It might depend on genre or your table or just how you feel that night or what particular adventure you're running. I often will, and this is one of the design intentions of Core, I'll often start a game with like almost no prep at all, just like kind of a loose idea about like some characters and some places that are related to a thing. And that's really it. Core is designed to let you get off the ground running with very little prep, just like that, because you're going to be relying on the group mind and the psychic content that comes out of the players who are smarter than you know. The players are creative geniuses, and I want to bring that out in people. But a full-on shared GM responsibility situation, a story game situation, often you get people who are it fills them with anxiety because they feel like the narrative ball has been passed to them and now they have to be a genius. It's like, oh, I'm going to a cocktail party where there's only going to be smart people saying smart things and creative people saying creative things, and they're all going to turn and look at me and I'm going to, I don't know, say, or I have to be. So that narrative contribution of the player, I didn't want it to be like expected or demanded, but instead welcomed and absolutely used when the GM wants to go there. So I aim straight down the middle. I mean, I've been revising it for a long time, but I went back to the original, back on storygames.com. The Day Trippers game got conceived and sort of built in public back in 2014 on the storygames.com forum. And I went back there recently. You can find it in the Wayback Machine. And I read the whole thread where we discussed Day Trippers open source game mechanics. And it's actually kind of cool, I guess. I could say it's scary, but I'm going to say it's kind of cool. How much of the original mechanics that we brainstormed all the way back then still survive in Core today? Like, I think that we hit a lot of nails squarely on the head back then. And the one split, if you could call it a split, was that there were people who wanted even less crunch, right? This is Story Games Forum. And so there were people who wanted it to be, no dice or no GM. And I did end up writing a version of that. It's at the back of the Day Trippers core rules for if you wanted to play in a totally collaborative style. I still have a GM. I came from the old country. But I wanted to make it as open as possible. So it is up to the GM. Now, a couple of years go by, Day Trippers goes out, the Day Trippers Game Master's Guide comes out. I put out various modules and adventures for Day Trippers. I start running the Legends of Tabletop Day Trippers campaign. The Legends of Day Trippers, that might be what we call it. We make the box set or whatever.
There you go.
And tweak the system and play with it as I went on running Day Trippers. Basically, the system became so clean and fast and enjoyable, and the playtests went so well, and the campaigns arose out of nowhere. And it just seemed to me that this didn't have to be limited to the Day Trippers game, that this style play, which is its own feeling, like when you play a Powered by the Apocalypse game, right? It has its own feeling, okay? The way that you relate to each other at the table, the roles that you assume, and the boundaries that you step across or don't. That defines sort of like the social structure of playing that game. And it has its own feeling. It's totally different than the feeling of playing D&D, right? It's totally different than the feeling of playing any trad game. And Blades in the Dark has a different feel than Powered by the Apocalypse. Well, playing Core has its own unique feeling, and I discovered that it's not limited to Day Trippers. Yes, Day Trippers makes a lot of things, I'm going to say, easier, because if you're comfortable improvising, as I am, and you prefer emergent story to pre-planned plot, as I do, then a surrealistic landscape is going to give you more freedom than pretty much any other kind of setting you could imagine. So sure, Day Trippers gives me a leg up. It gives me the creative freedom to be surrealistic and spontaneous. Gonzo, take it as far as I want to take it. But underneath that, there's the basic mechanic, which is super simple. The same mechanic is used for every type of role, whether it's combat or diplomacy or, I don't know, did you remember to bring your shoes? The dice all work the same way. You've got a pool of dice represented by your stat number. You've got bonuses represented by your skills and any modifiers that the GM throws on there. You try to beat a target number, which is it's really common. Even D&D does this now. Okay, even D&D 5e does this now. That's how common that has become. But the set a DL based on an adjective, which corresponds to a scale of difficulty, that goes all the way back to Iron Crown, is where I first saw it. That's where Monty Cook first saw it. That's why you find it in Core. That's why you find it in Cypher. It's just a really elegant, simple way to do things, and that's what I'm looking for. The most elegant, simplest way to do this. What should the stat range be? 1 to 100, 1 to 20, 3 to 18. Well, okay, no, the answer in Core is always what is the smallest number that you can make work. Well, like if you see an actor portraying a role on TV, let's talk about his health, or let's talk about his brains, or let's talk about his dexterity. Like, how many different ways could that actor play this scene which were distinct and clear enough to me to make an absolutely unquestionable assumption about what the actor's trying to convey? And I'm almost it's never more than 10. It's probably more like 6. Think about it. Even when the guy gets wounded, you never see a person bleed every hit point from 99 on down. You couldn't tell the difference between hit point 97 and 96. It's hard enough to tell the difference between hit point 3 and hit point 2. But if the scale is small enough, then everything that happens to that actor, even the smallest thing, the smallest shift in state, is noticeable. And your player knows how to play it now. And the math will make the dice do what the number says. Like, okay, instead of 5 out of 6 times nailing that jump, now you're wounded, and that's going to be 4 out of 6 times. The cost of your stats is literally identical, or close, rounded, to the odds generated by the dice you're rolling. I mean, I don't want to waste your time screen sharing, but you could go to the Core Reddit. You could go to the Core Reddit, or you could go to the Core Discord. I'll throw it in there too. And you can see the chart that I use. I calculated all the odds out, and from that generated the costs. When you create your character and you do the skill point, the point buy system, you're literally spending for those dice odds. That's why the costs are what they are. So again, the system handles it for you. It's as simple as possible. You don't need to know that. You just go, wow, +3 is expensive. That's all you need to know. It's what does it allow us to do narratively? If you, as a player, especially a newbie player, if I tell you, okay, well, level is kind of an open rating, but we kind of consider it 1 to 20, and I'm going to give you a pre-made character who's a level 3 ranger, and you're like, hang on, what is a level 3? And you said on a scale of 20, and what is 20 and what is 1? And I don't even know what you're talking about. The numbers are too big and there's too many numbers. So the answer in Core is always to make it simpler, make the scale smaller, so that any change in state that happens to your character or to an ability or to your stats or even to other things in the world is clearly evident and narratively significant. That's the goal. The goal of Core is to tell the story. We're going to make a story happen here. I don't want the mechanics getting in the way. I want just enough mechanics to make this thing make sense, and he give you a prompt, gives you a good idea. Keep those good ideas flowing. Get the system out of the way. Keep talking.
Makes sense.
Right? So over the years, it just got simpler and simpler until it became Core Micro.
which is the smallest core, which we've talked about before.
It's the core of core.
Yeah.
I have two quick questions. It's one of them is actually something that's been sitting on my mind for a while, and I just never had time
Please,
to
somebody
ask
else talk for a while. God, I feel
so.
like
So when you talk about when you talk about traditional games, in what would you classify as a traditional game, and in core, what from that tradition has been brought over and what have you purposefully left behind?
Well, when I say traditional games, the easiest shorthand is for people to think Dungeons and Dragons. And so I'm fine if you do that. Because it is, like, in many people's minds, it's the only role-playing game. And in most people's minds, it's sort of the standard definition of what an RPG is. Now, I don't think there is such a thing as a definition of what an RPG is. That's why there's so many different types of experimentation and branches of, you have gamism, simulationism, narrativism, and now I'm exploring experientialist narrativism. Things start breaking into finer and finer disciplines. We still don't have an academic language for any of this stuff, so it's rhizomic and it's spontaneous. But over there, you sort of point toward the center of the bush that we all originally sprang from, right? The tap root, right? The main...
Yeah.
And that's Dungeons and Dragons. And so when you say traditional, is moving in the direction of the taproot, right? The older, more classical definitions in which basically the GM is responsible for everything in the world except the player, and the player is responsible for all of their own decisions, but nothing about the world. What did I keep? Well, I kept that basic stance. There is a GM in core. And although anyone is welcome to hack it in a GM-less way, but the way that I write it, the way that I play it, and the way that all the skins so far have gone, there is a GM. It's just that the boundary between what the GM is allowed to say and what the player is allowed to say is really blurry and sometimes completely obliterated. Did that answer your question? I kept a lot of the OSR kind of feel. The whole idea that it's really there's no pre-planned plot. There's no puzzle with only one way to solve it, and we're all sitting here waiting for somebody to, no. It's more about the GM's going to come up with some weird situation, and the player is going to come up with some weird solution that no one even thought of before, and then we're going to roll some dice, and we're going to see. So it urges you to be creative in the same way that, like, puzzle solving and problem solving in the OSR urges players to be creative. It's more about what ideas the player has than what I don't have a skill in that, so I'm not allowed to say anything. Right? No, I want you to open your mouth and say something.
Yeah.
What do you got for us, Kurt?
What, are you seriously going to put this on me now? Jeez. I didn't have any questions prepared. Actually, I do have something now that came to my head.
I want to play your WWA game. I really do, but I don't know any. I have imposter syndrome about wrestling.
I don't think you need. It's funny because now that you said, like, you were like, well, you need to write some more stuff on it that,
I'm sure it's obvious to you.
Yeah.
It's not, I know the word kayfabe, and I know that there's faces and there's heels, and that's about it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is I haven't really watched wrestling that much in a super long time myself, actually. So that's probably why I haven't even played it myself, which is pretty sad saying that, like, hey, buy my game. I've never played it, but it'll probably be, I think it's one of those things where the first time I do want to play it, and this is kind of dumb saying that anyway, is I would want to have some people around that know wrestling just to see if once you play it, if people feel like this is a game that's for the fans of the game. And not only that, but then I can ask that question, like, okay, so if you didn't know wrestling, would you want to play this game? You know,
Well,
and it
yeah,
gives
I mean, there's like the Worldwide Wrestling game, which I hear is great, and I would love to give it a shot. But same thing, I don't know if I'll know what I'm talking about, and I don't know if the rules explain it to me. I have a feeling they probably do, but maybe at a level deeper than I actually want to go. Your game might give me a level that's like, I don't know, about as deep as a cartoon.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. Well, the
It's
thing is
not
with
as big of an investment. Just teach me a couple basic words, and then we can play with it.
yeah. Well, and I think with wrestling, it's I think like some of these companies now have done a good job of calling it entertainment now. So like you don't have to like, okay, this is wrestling. Like I saw one thing where it was like two wrestlers were like did like almost like their own play. They were like eating at a restaurant, and then it turned into something else. And I'm like, what the hell am I watching right now? And I'm like, this isn't wrestling, but it was because it was part of the narrative and stuff like that. So like, I think one of the cool things
Yeah.
that having like the woodland creatures be a part of it, like you don't have to make it be specifically wrestling based. Like you can make it into this wrestling thing, but then also you can make it into this storyline where it's like almost like you're playing like I can't think of what, like Mouse Guard or whatever, where it's like you're taking these characters and you're weaving this little story. Well, you can do that, and you can even have wrestling be the background of that, really, if you wanted to. So
like a Josie and the Pussycats adventure.
Yeah, exactly. You can. That's the thing. Like the thing that I think.
How's that for dating oneself? The first thing I think of is Josie and the Pussycat.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the thing that I think that I actually dislike about role-playing games the most is that people think when they see a role-playing game, regardless of what it is, if it's D&D, if it's any Monte Cook game, if it's Call of Cthulhu, people just put it in a box, and they call it this box, and that's what that box is. Yeah. And I hate that. I love taking games like even when John and the other John were playing my Dungeons and Dragons game, I was like, we don't need to stay in this box. Like I even, did like what Todd would do. I would just be like, why don't you tell me about your character? And like you bring out yourself in your character. And I know like John would always be like, kind of deer in headlights, like, I don't really know. I don't know if I want to do this. But then when he got to doing it, he did it well because he knows his character and he knows how to play and he knows where he wants to go. So like he always says, like,
there's a thing that I recognized when I was beginning to work with LARPs back in the, I guess, early 90s. A couple of things. First off is the simpler you make the system, the easier it is for people to immerse. That one's like, maybe I thought, because I came from Iron Crown, I came from the crunchiest of the crunchy traditional systems, right? I thought that in order to like have a number to reach back for, something to fall back on, no matter what the situation was, that you needed a sheet with hundreds of numbers on it, right? And the numbers had to be really detailed, like a scale of 1 to 100, so you could get fine precision, and that scared the fuck out of people. And I learned it when I moved from the tabletop into LARPing with people who don't even know what a role-playing game is. Total strangers. To them, this was kind of like a group therapy experiment or something, right? A social game of some kind. We didn't even have the word LARP at the time. We didn't know that word. I think they were using it like in Norway in 1991, but I was not. I called it hyper theater. And I did use some actors who were semi-scripted, but basically it was like total strangers. And in order to get these total strangers, I did 4 of these things. And every time I did it, I made the system simpler and simpler and simpler. I ended up with something not like Core, but with about the same degree of complexity as Core. Because you just want the person to have just enough information to begin projecting themselves on this thing. That's what's really going on. Yeah. And here's the second realization. Oh, the player character sheet I actually use this line in the DGMG years later. The player character sheet is a psychic osmotic membrane. It bleeds in both directions, okay? From you into the game world and from the game world into you. And so I actually want to make that as transparent as possible. It's part of my job as a game designer and as a GM is if I want you immersed, I want to be flowing directly into your head and your head flowing directly into the world and reincorporating that information back into the world. That's what reality does. I don't need a plot. I just need a system that's simple enough so that I can think fast. And you know what? I don't need hundreds of numbers. Because it turns out that if you think well about how you want your stats to work, and you go, okay, well, this is about the scale. How many stats do we need? 6 is a great number for a lot of reasons. Traditional game, D&D, there's 6 stats. D6, simplicity. D6, everybody has a D6. You don't even need to buy dice to play this game. I'll own the D6. There's 6. Okay, we use 6. There's 6 stats. They're rated on a scale of 1 to 6. This is all staying in the realm of simple and to comprehend. 3 of the stats are physical. 3 of them are mental. We can get more in depth of. The whole idea was to take reality and make the simplest model, not a detailed specific model, but a model that was just detailed enough. So the difference between 1 and 2 or 5 and 6 was just enough to give you some idea what that means, like quickly and easily. Right? The trick is that no matter what you come up with, it always comes from your head. So you may feel this piece of paper in front of me, it's not me doing this, it's him, it's my character. So if I feel safe to say wacky things, to allow subconscious content to just bubble up from the back of my brain and come out my mouth, because I always deny it and I always say it wasn't me, it was him. But secretly, we all know that there's nothing that comes out of your mouth. It's not you. You're the one that decided to be this guy. You're the one that decided what came out of his mouth. So we're really looking into your head. And if we use that, we get deeper fiction, more emotional affect, more immersion, more meaning, not only for our characters in the story, but ultimately for us as people around the table. Because when I was LARPing, I had people come up to me after the games and they'd be like, I learned something about myself tonight by stepping out of myself, or by exaggerating this aspect of myself, or by trying the same approach I always try, but with 20 different people in 3 hours. I learned something about the real me by playing a fictional me. And I went, shit. If you make it simple enough for anybody to dive in quick, and give them the freedom to spontaneously generate as much as they can. And you hold them in a state where they feel emotionally engaged and they trust you and they're having fun. You can actually change people's lives. You can get inside their heads. You can learn things, teach things, share things that are too deep for words, literally. As a group, our Day Trippers group has had experiences in realities that don't exist, where, Jesse or John or the other John could just say 1 or 2 words and send the rest of us into a very strange mood that would take half an hour to describe. Saying something about the human condition, or about, existential angst, or the nature of man eat man in the dog eat dog capitalist world. There's no other medium that lets you do this. I just wanted to get the math and the machine parts out of the way to let the human part come through, because these games can actually change people's lives, change people's minds. It is the deepest medium I think humankind has ever created. It's the only art form that can, if you want, include all the other art forms in it. I've written songs. I've written languages. You guys have probably done shit like this for your fictional worlds too. You do geography, you do You do climatology, meteorology, you do astrology, you make up fucking constellations. You make up like races, and they have to have histories, so you make up histories, and you have to study real history to figure out how to do the fake history. Before you know it, you're a master of all this shit that's got nothing to do with did we kill the rust monster? It's actually a lot deeper than did you kill the rust monster. If I wanted to play a realistic simulation of battle, now we have computer games for that. Much more realistic. More realistic than any dice game could ever do. So I don't even try competing with that. You know,
Well,
my players are creative geniuses, and I'm the showrunner. I keep them going, I keep them flowing, and what comes out is smarter than anything any computer can do, because it's fast and it's human. It's basing itself on emotion, symbolism. There's no waiting. There's no way for the machine to figure out why the sky turning gray is different than the sky turning green. You picture both of those things, and you know immediately they both feel different, right? That's a direct symbolic emotional connection from my brain to your brain. Computers don't know how to do this shit. Only a live human storyteller knows what words to use, what tone to use, what pacing to use to set you in the space where you feel comfortable and creative, involved, and spontaneous genius shit just comes out of your mouth.
Yeah, but see, you're a master at that. I mean, the Day Trippers game as an example. I mean, for the three of us, that's almost like therapy. It's like 3 hours of therapy almost, right? Like the game is almost just a pastiche of everything else that's happening as we just like sort of deep, because Day Trippers isn't meant to be played as a deep, psychodramatic, story sequence. It's like, hey, we're gonna jump to a red planet that's got
stop you there.
rat
It is meant to be played as deep and psychoactive. It is not necessarily written. It was not originally designed to be long-term unfolding life themes. That it was not designed for. I was picturing deep and fast. Like, we're going to deal with this, and you're going to learn I hate my father, and then the episode ends.
So yeah, one of the things you kind of hit on the head is with RPGs and games in general, outside of video games that attempt simulation, right? Because in order to do that, they believe that it requires an immense amount of mechanics, immense amount of math, lots of rolling. And in accomplishing that, for me, it breaks the realism. A while ago, I had one friend, I can't remember what the system.
Do you remember, like compare Tomb Raider, the original Tomb Raider, to the new Tomb Raider?
Yeah. Right. But yeah, I had one friend a while ago that was trying to turn me on to this one system about how in depth and how realistic you could get with everything, and how, in order to throw one punch, you had to roll like 5 different times, and then the other person, they had to roll to dodge and block and all that, and how like just 5 seconds of the game took.
The first. I never published it, thank God, but the first system I ever created took Iron Crown and multiplied it. I had primary stats, secondary stats, and tertiary stats. I had static stats and variable stats. You had 5 different kinds of stats for a total of something like 70.
Oh, wow.
It was insane. It was, But that was the way I was thinking, and I later came to regard that as what I called GM's disease.
Yeah.
There is a demiurge in my head, and it wants to mechanize everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very zen about doing it. I love it. It's one of the probably the first thing that appealed to me about game design. I was designing games before I knew what role-playing games were. My brother and I would invent card games and map games and weird shit. But the idea of like taking something that happens in real life and building a working model of it, I just find that fascinating. It's like some people like model planes or whatever, right? I like building working mathematical models of dynamic real world events. So I think it's cool. And it's fractal, right? Reality fractal. You can get all the way down to the subatomic level. If you wanted to, we could roll for what all the molecules do, all the way up into what your sword does, all the way up into what his body is doing while the sword hits his body.
Yep.
It could take literally years to play one round of combat if you wanted to do it that way. The reality has that much detail in it. But because of my experiments with LARPs and with total strangers who didn't even know what a role-playing game was, and working in a time limit, because Harm and Circle, I'm sure we'll touch on that later. When you work in theater spaces, the time limit is also important. I wanted to be an actor before anything else. I majored in performing arts in high school. It took me a couple of years before I realized, actors don't write the words they say. Right? They're just saying somebody else's words. So what you really want to be is the writer. But it took me a while to figure that out. But I went to the American Academy of Performing Arts test for 1 year, and I majored in acting and was in band and drama and stagecraft and did all that geeky theater kid shit for a few years. And I'm sure that some of that has bled into the way that I GM, but also because I'm either in a theater space or I'm on a podcast. There is a time limit, and I want to tell you a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Or tell is the wrong word, right? I want us to elicit a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. I want us to get to a place that feels like a good place to stop, but I want to do it within this time limit. And it means give or take 10 minutes. I know where I need it to end. And there's a lot of reasons why you have to start thinking about narrative structure now. How do you produce a narrative structure without railroading your players? Now, you won't find this in Core Micro, but you will find it in the upcoming Core Complete book. And it's not that I haven't thought about it. I've thought about it a lot. But so far, the most you'll find it written down is in the Day Trippers Game Master's Guide. I've simplified that, and I've changed it since then. My approach today is actually simpler than that. But if you wanted to start running Core the way that I run it, your best leg up right now is to read the Day Trippers Game Master's Guide, and then just realize that it doesn't have to be Day Trippers. Because that narrative structure becomes really important. That's where the meaning comes from. If the story doesn't come to an end, it's hard to draw a meaning from it, right? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's a lot of subtle, unsaid stuff that you're saying is not in Core Micro that, all of us collectively, creating our own worlds for Core now are sort of stumbling on some of these, aspects of Core and, running Core and, playing, even experiencing it as a player is different. And there's a lot of, subtle things that come up. Well, I hadn't really thought about it because you've run it. So like, well, how the fuck does this work? Or what does this mean? Or like, how do I, do
and it
this
actually
thing
did take me a long time, even though I wrote some of this stuff down in the DTGMG 2015, so 6-7 years ago. There's some of it that I kind of forgot, or that I was just being spontaneous and intuitive about, and I didn't actually realize how deep it was going to end up going until playing it for years, literally, with you guys. And so by the time I get to Core Micro, and now you guys are writing other games based on that, Core Micro wants to be micro, so it doesn't really have a GM section in it, and I think maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I need to add in a GM section. But there is a sort of a fuzzy line between, like, how do you run Core, or how do you run Core the way Todd runs it, the way that its designer runs it. And if I do it right, Core Complete will fill that in the same way that if you read Apocalypse World, I haven't read the second edition, but I've heard that it's really not much better in this regard Amazing game. Milestone game for me. Okay. Apocalypse World blew my mind and opened a lot of doors for me that led eventually to me creating Day Troopers in Core. But it is one of the worst organized game manuals I've ever read in my life.
Road Trader
Instead,
might fight for that.
I was
spot.
about to say, clearly you haven't read Road Trader.
because Vincent spends like over half the time in narrative fiction mode, talking in character, and then an example like pops in the middle of the paragraph where he's talking in character about a scene that he's describing. And so when you want to find that mechanic later, you have to remember what scene that was in and find, oh, here's where he talks about seduction or whatever the hell. It was actually in a big, long passage about the scene between these two characters. There's no organization at all. But what he does super well, because he writes in character, you read one page of Apocalypse World and you already have a real strong feeling about what the world feels like and about what Vincent feels about running this world. And so that's the kind of level that I hope to express when I added the GM section and we get closer and closer to core complete. The part that right now is best approximated in the Day Troopers Game Master's Guide is what are the assumptions that Todd's making. And if you think about it a little bit, sometimes it's mostly just about backing up. Like Jesse and I have been talking about runners a lot lately. And I almost always find when you're facing a design question in core, you're thinking too hard. Your first instinct is to add another table or build a sub-mechanic. And you may be right, maybe. But often it's about pulling back and going, actually, if you thought about it, not like a mechanic, but like a screenwriter. And I'm writing a story, and I want the audience to understand this. So when this unit depends on that unit, and something happens to that unit, is it dramatically meaningful enough to bother putting any math in here at all? Will an adjective do? Or a prompt? Or a yes and? And if you can work it back into the yes and, no but system, then almost all the time the answer is, oh, well, then just come up with a number, call it something, and use the universal mechanic. If it's complex enough to have 5 different outcomes, then it's complex enough to be included in the game. If it's not complex enough to have 5 possible outcomes, it's probably a binary. Do you have this adjective or not? Like a tag.
Well, and so, Kevin, to try to shoehorn you in the conversation here, having run Core Cthulhu now a couple times, how do you feel about running Core Cthulhu as opposed to, say, Call of Cthulhu or D&D or some anything else that you've run? How do you feel the differences in presenting that to players?
And I think Todd touched on it earlier, and I think we've talked about it previously, especially if you're going to do like a Cthulhu game. There is a lot of, it's not the D&D where, your tank takes, 80 different hits and he's still going kind of thing. It's, it's set in a world where someone gets shot and you're probably going to die if you get shot kind of thing. And the investigation part. So as Todd pointed out, the story says, okay, you have to find something or see something or discover something. If you leave it up to the dice, the chances are if everyone fails, then that point that you wanted to shoot off of or expand on has failed because no one made their rolls. And I think the thing I liked, the thing I like most about Core is the dice rolls feed into the narrative. So the no negative, no positive, yes negative, yes positive, that allows the players to take and expand it narratively, or the person running it to then go and expand it. So you're in a library, you need to find this article to find someone to move the story along. If everybody fails to roll straight up, then you're stuck. But if you fail and it's a positive, then you can shoehorn in something else, or split that off into another narrative from that. So that's the thing
And
I
the
really like
GM,
about
the
Core.
GM can put the brake on that without ever saying a word or let
Yeah.
it happen.
Yeah.
And because of that, you've got like every single time something comes up, you've got at least 5 ways it could go. And then you've got 5 hidden ways because you could just let it happen, or you could make somebody roll something, right? It's almost like you've got creative options.
Weird.
And a silly thing about that, and I think we talked about it in one of the games we were playing. So if everybody's pushed for time, or maybe everybody's not feeling it that night, or things like that, you can use those roles to then mold that game. So you're keeping everybody involved and excited, even if someone was late or someone has to go early, or someone dropped because of the weather or stuff, things like that, or someone says, what, can we finish up because I got something else going on. You can use those roles, and you can use those narrative points on those roles. And I think that's one of the ones in the game we ran last, is I had it mapped out how we wanted it to go, but the players did something I wasn't expecting. So just chunk out that whole piece of the narrative I wrote and let the roles play, and let the players and their characters guide you. And I think the question I would have for you, Todd, is, so the narrative for that, the no negative, no positive, I really like that. That's one of my favorite parts of Core, is because it lets you have that flexibility from story, or from not just the characters but the players themselves. Like I said, real life stuff comes up. Hey, I got to go do something in 20 minutes. Can we wrap it up here? Those roles and those negative positive effects let you play into that. Did you put that specific framing in there from past experience, or did you just think that's something that would help the help the system itself because of past experience with other role-playing systems that had that, the no negative, no positive, that kind of thing, not just relying on dice, but also not relying on everyone's improv ability, kind of melding them together?
Well, again, when Core was first designed, it was designed as Day Trippers, really. And so we were thinking Day Trippers, and it was an open source project. I was not actually the first dude who talked about it. The guy named, I think, Dave Potemkin came up with this wacky idea. We were talking about old heavy metal magazines and the kind of surrealistic science fiction, like Mobius, or Bilal, where you could just like the people from another dimension appear, and they have animal heads, and they take you with them in their ship, and you're in a place where you fly into the mouth of a giant baby head in space, and there's a whole intergalactic federation in here, and it's a shopping mall, and just bizarro science fiction, right? And we were trying to think, well, is there really what system would you use for that? We might have to create one if you really wanted to go for true surrealism, right? Because surrealism, as a artistic form, is not just being weird, that's being surrealistic, right? But being truly surreal, and what the surrealists meant when they invented the movement, was about bypassing the conscious mind and getting content directly from the unconscious. And they would invent techniques for doing it, and often they would involve randomly selecting things or destroying things, like writing things and then cutting them up and rearranging the words with your eyes closed, or trying to break up the natural patterns in order to find unconscious patterns of creativity. And so the word surreal suggested all of that to me. And the fact that we were talking in the Story Games forum, so I'm surrounded by people who, I wouldn't say disapprove of the traditional GM model, but they get brownie points for stepping away from it. And so I'm engaging with that crowd and brainstorming this idea, and I became the lead developer on what eventually became Day Trippers. When thinking about mechanics, I wanted to avoid being numeric and crunchy, although I knew I needed some numbers because I didn't want to go pure Lady Blackbird. Nothing but adjectives. I liked the 1 to 6 scale. I liked keeping everything on the same scale. And I was playing with 2d6 and 3d6 and starting to work out the math and starting to get married to that idea. And I knew that the story gamers wouldn't like it. And I wasn't completely satisfied with it either, because roll to hit or fail lacks any where's the surrealist technique here, right? Where's the spontaneous urge for subconscious content? All I give you is a yes or a no to something that you said to me very consciously. I'm talking to your critical mind now. I'm telling it yes or no. I'm not getting any surrealism at all. I want to get deeper. I need to engage you. What processes engage you? Well, the most engaging game at the time in my head was Archipelago. Because there, not only are there no dice, but you say what your character's destiny is right off at the bat, right at the beginning of the game. You know where you're going. And everybody kind of helps each other get to where their character's going. Matthew Holtschus, I believe. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Holthus? Hard for me to pronounce Norwegian names. But anyways, the whole idea of yes and no and yes but, no but, came from Archipelago, which is the most freeform table-based game that I could think of at the time. And I really loved it. It was simple. It went along with that whole thing. When you're taught improv, you know, I took classes in improv, and one of the things they drill in your head is yes and, right? If you want your story to continue and grow and thrive, never deny what the other actor says. Always say yes and then take it one step further, because that creativity builds and snowballs. I like that. Yeah. But this is a game
that's the most misunderstood mechanic in improv. And you explained it perfectly, Todd, and 90% of the people who try to use that don't know what it actually means.
And I think that point Todd brought up, and that's probably why I like that mechanic, is the yes and no, no negative, no positive, because at least from my standpoint, when I wrote something or I wrote some of the things that we've played, in my mind, I'm playing it out saying, okay, well, let's do this. We're going to go from, first act, second act, third act. To get us to there, I'm betting John's character is going to do this, or Jesse's character is going to do that, or John B's character is going to do that. But, it's almost like you're writing a novel. And then I think when the players go do something you're not expecting or taking you down a different path, I don't get stressed about it running it in core that I didn't plan for this. I didn't have any options for them to do this. The negative and positive on the
not only should you not get stressed about it, you should actually consider that a design flaw. Because there's no reason, like, okay, the way I look at it, so I did in Golden Age Adventures, I took 16 classic science fiction stories written from the 30s to the 50s by famous people. I mean, Paul Anderson is in there, Philip K. Dick is in there, I think I have a Harry Harrison in there. Stanley Weinbaum. These guys wrote what at the time was considered, far out prescient science fiction. And now you look back at it and it's like, it's wacky. It's almost Gumby. It's like pretty surreal. And so it fits because it feels surreal to us now, looking back to it. So I did this book where I took these stories and I turned them into Day Trippers modules. But in order to make them work for core, in order to make them work in my style at all, what I had to do is break them into pieces, remove the storyline completely, stat the NPCs, stat the monsters, stat the locations, stat the events, stat the items, put the items in the locations, give the monsters motivations and fears or whatever, give the NPCs drives and goals. Everything about the story, though, should be considered a mere accident, the way it went one time. Right? The way it went the one time the storyteller's imaginary game group played it. But you're not him, and your group isn't his group, And that's just one possible arrangement of all of these objects. That's the way I approach the game. So it's object oriented, if you will. A little software lingo for you. The idea is that all the objects are disconnected. They're scattered out there on the table. You may hit them in any order. And the order you hit them will change what happens. And whatever happens, some of them are going to move whether or not you do anything. And a story will emerge. I don't know what it is yet, but a story will emerge.
Well, that's the
way I build it.
approach, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a bunch of elements in place. You've got NPCs doing a thing, and then just sort of push the PCs at it, and whatever happens, happens.
Well, that's
right.
So that's one of the big things we've, me and John have talked about this in designing adventures for Cthulhu, but in general, well, except for my games, because as I said, I love tables. And so all my shit's just table driven anyway. So, but like if you were to,
so is Day Trippers.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah. Which is where
it's
I got
not, I mean, it's I wouldn't say that. I like to call them oracles though. Right?
Yes, there you go.
Because like on the one hand you go, oh no, extra crunch, extra subsystems, no, that's the enemy. But if you use them as oracles, no, they actually feed into the generative process, because now your subconscious, your conscious mind goes, wait a minute, I just rolled floating and lava, and I know we're on an ice planet, and now your unconscious mind starts coming up with shit. You have to connect floating and lava and ice, right? Somehow
to explain that, yep.
To explain what you just rolled. Yeah.
Yep.
So your subconscious starts filling in the blanks.
Yeah.
You can't even help it. That's why the oracle tables are good, although it's up to you how many you can handle. I mean, the Day Troopers book has like 72 tables.
Yeah.
Any fucking weird thing. Dude, I have a random colors table.
He does, yeah. Yep. Yeah. But no, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the system, core lets. So if you're having, like Todd said, getting people who are new to it or haven't played it before, or, have never played an RPG before, I think that the mechanic for those roles, then adding on, lets the person running the game move them along and help them. Or like when we play, everybody here has played a million games, right? So you don't really have to guide them. And the positives and negatives let them build their own story, their own scenario. So it's not just you trying to railroad them. So I think it's that flexible, saying you can take new players who've never seen it and kind of guide them, or let the players go wild and create their own thing. So that's the fun bit about it, is you don't need all that historical. Okay, well, what games have you played? Well, you played D&D, which edition have you played? Because there's that much difference between them. Or, a Cthulhu game is very regimented on what can happen with roles. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like about core, is it expands out or contracts depending on what's needed for the moment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the big things we've talked about. Yeah. Oh God.
Right. If the table, like whatever's happening at the table is going to affect what happens in the game. If you're all having a bad day, you're going to get a very sardonic game session. It's your mood's going to be reflected in it, because I'm doing everything I can to remove the system. I don't know if it was Ron Edwards who coined the word, but he certainly popularized the phrase "fiction first." Your narrativist games tend to go fiction first, and what that means is there's never a moment where you're looking at your character sheet going, well, I've got a +3. I definitely need to use that, but if I do it with this, then I get a +5. Then I'd have a +8. I'm going to work out a way where I can do the stabbing attack from the shadows, and then you spend your whole time trying to figure out how to work in a stabbing attack from the shadows so you can get your fucking +8. You were driven by the +8, right? That's the last thing I want. What I want is the story and your feelings to make you come up with an idea. I need to do the thing. Mm-hmm. And then the GM goes, okay, let's see what dice we need to do that thing. And we quickly figure that out, and then get the math out of the way, because we're back to storytelling again.
You know, when we were talking on Discord the other day, and you were discussing, you know, the potential of lethal and non-lethal damage and all this kind of stuff, and you know, potential modifiers for all that. One of the things that it immediately brought up in my mind is I had a D&D group a long time ago where
That was me getting a case of GM's disease, by the way. For a moment there.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And and it was 3rd edition, which was, you know, potentially one of the crunchiest version of D&D that they've had yet. And I would have players who would talk themselves out of doing things because of the numbers. Because they'd say, well, I want to do this. I would love to do this thing. However, if I do it, I could potentially take an attack of opportunity, and I'd be dealing with a +4 doing this. However, if I just straight up attack it, I'm dealing with a +7. And so, and
right.
you
So
know,
what those guys are doing is fiction follows.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So in like giving it more numbers and giving it all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Your creative wings are flipped now.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that's why that was what was in the back of my mind when we were talking. And that's kind of why I tried to talk you, you know, to talk that down, because all I thought about was the people saying, well, I really do want to keep this guy alive, but if I do it, I'm rolling it a -2. So fuck it. I'm just going to kill him. Whereas they should they should just be like, fuck, just, it's a game. Just do whatever you want and let's let it decide. And that's what I love about Core and what you've driven us to, especially over the Day Trippers game, and how the game plays into that, where it's you say what you want to do, you say what your character projects is going to happen. Mm-hmm. You talk about all that, and then it's a single roll that decides then the outcome of what they attempted to do. And it's super simple, but something that I think all games strive to do, but the mechanics inevitably end up getting in the way.
Well, and I think that's like a huge problem with D&D, right? Where you have the number crunch and you want to, you know, min-max the character. And like, even if you like to role play, like you're still, you know, when you're creating a character, you're trying to, you know, make everything work the best way possible. But like, I feel like Kurt, for the game that you ran for us, even though like I'm gonna kind of do that on the front end, right, and creating a character, and you know, try to make sure the bonuses stack and things sort of make sense, and you know, it's gonna work the way that I want it to. Did you feel like when you ran that game that we had that sort of an issue? Because I feel like Core has sort of now colored all of our role-playing experience, where everything that we play now, regardless of whatever the system wants to do, we play fiction first, even if it's detrimental to a character. Not that you're like, well, you know, I'm not going to take the +8. Well, no, okay, I'm going to try to parkour up the wall because I have a +8 in acrobatics, you know, and try to get behind him and stab him.
Right now, you're in that blurry area, right, between the way Core works and the way Todd runs. Right, because it's a little bit both. Like I was talking about Apocalypse World earlier, right? When you got like the principles, there's a list of principles in Apocalypse World, and you're supposed to have internalized them as a GM, right? But when an ethical, experienced GM reads the Apocalypse World principles, there's like 10 of them, maybe 12. And at least 7 or 8 of them, you'll go, oh, I do that. Oh, I do that already. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It's good to do that. Right. In other words, what he codified was his own ethic about the way he GMs. And there's a blurry line between what's Apocalypse World. The principles are written down, after all, and what's just, you know, the way Vincent thinks a GM should be. Because when you read those principles, you know, most of them you go, oh yeah, that's just what a good GM should do. Right? Like, it's almost like, why did you write these down, Vincent? Right? These are just obviously good ideas. Right. And I think when it comes to Core, we're in that blurry area where it's kind of like you guys may have started from, and I too, you know, started from a more trad world, But having explored this territory and starting to see different ways to approach the table, I don't want to say system doesn't matter. System does matter, but it doesn't matter categorically. You could, in theory, you could approach any game in the style of another game, I think.
Yeah. So that I'm actually interested. So
Oh, we
of the
finally said
four-
something interesting.
Yeah, right. Well, no, it's of the four of us here, sans Todd, who me and John have played core under Todd. And
For a
as far
long
as I
time.
know, Kevin and Kurt haven't.
I have.
But you have? Oh, well,
Yeah, because Todd ran something for the MFG cast quite a while ago, and it was really
Day Trippers game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was
That's
day
right.
trip. It was freaky, and I loved it. I think about that often, actually.
All right, well, then I guess this is for Kevin. Although Kurt, yours was a while ago, so you might, I don't know. But so
Kurt was a one shot.
Right, yeah. So how is your experience with core as you know, and we've talked often how occasionally, sometimes it's difficult to differentiate Todd from core, because it is your system, right? And so you kind of develop I feel like over time, like the system is kind of developed into how you run, right?
Yeah, but what's left out of the rules is like when to do this, when to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. So how for the two of you, it's more so for Kevin because you've never run under Todd before, but generally for the two of you, how is it running? Does core feel like we're explaining it with Todd? Like, does it still feel like that, like narrativistic driven game that has all the options and everything like that we experience under Todd constantly?
Lots of bleed.
Right.
I would hope that you guys feel that the games we've played with core stick to what you feel when you've played with Todd, right? Not saying, okay, well, Todd did it this way, you did it that way, but like the overall feel of, this is what we're expecting. Like, okay, we're going to play a core game. I don't want anybody at the end of it going, holy crap, that I wasn't expecting that, or, that kind of thing, or it, not from a story standpoint or a character standpoint, but from the system standpoint. Like, okay, well, I know we've talked, since this is something new for me, there's been a bit of banter that obviously John probably has to cut out of, okay, we'll do it like this. Or, I've asked, okay, we have this situation, how should we resolve it? And everybody comes back and says, well, this is the way we've done it before. This is what we've all gone to the core roles to go through it. So hopefully it hasn't got to the point, or hopefully it's never been brought up saying that didn't feel like a core game. And to me, not having the experience of either playing with Todd or playing in other core games, to me, I feel I've stayed true to what the system is expecting, right? You don't want to go in, and I think we've said this before, if you want it to be more crunchy, you can make it more crunchy. You can have people do a lot of roles, or you could just go with it and say, let's make it all narrative and eliminate the roles. We always joke around about the games that John and Jesse and I have played in the past, that we roll dice maybe once every 2 sessions on a super crunchy system, but that's just the way we play and that's the way we interact. So I think core, to me, lets it be, like Todd said, everybody's having a shit day. No one's got really the creative juices flowing. You know what? Let's roll a million times because that will drive it forward. Or if everybody's all looped up and excited and in a good headspace, then you don't have to do any rolls because everybody has good ideas from a narrative standpoint. So I'm hoping
that's a
that,
great point.
yeah, and I'm hoping when we've played them, to me, I've never gone away from the sessions we've done saying we should have done this or should we have done that. Everybody seems to be pretty excited the way it went, and I felt good about the way it went. So as long as, and we've said before, as long as everybody happy and had a good time, then that's all I'm really shooting for. So
I would say if like now might be a moment for me to offer a critique, because I have watched all of you guys play tests on the channel. So all the core Cthulhu stuff that's out there, I've seen it. I've seen Kevin run, I think, 2 scenarios. And I would agree with everything you say. I would say there are 2 road bumps for you, and one of them is something you can address directly, and the other is something that we really need to get to a meta level and think about a little. So the one that you can address directly is just about being comfortable with when action frames start happening. That's confusing for a lot of people because they've never played a game where everybody rolls once and then we resolve. And it's weird. It's admittedly weird. Now, all the rules you need are there, but you have to keep looking at them. And there's not many, but you have to internalize them. So you have to look at them until you internalize them. Okay. Somebody at that table, it was either the GM or one of the players, somebody made the highest natural roll. If there's any question about resolution order, the person who made the highest natural roll, their side resolves first. So that handles that. But everybody declares before the dice hit the table. So that's another thing that some games do, some games don't. This game, you declare what you intend to do. Because when the dice hit the table, you may get that and more, right? Or you may get almost that. So we have to know what you're aiming for. And we say what everybody's aiming for. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. Even if you succeed, you're probably not going to get exactly that. Right? So you declare first. If there's any question about order, look at the dice. If the dice are tied, look at skills and then look at stats. If there's ever any question about resolving order, those rules are in the game. They rarely need to come up, though. Usually it's pretty clear. If I'm running across the room and you're shooting at me, it's obviously you're going to resolve first. It's going to take me longer than you. So a lot of the time it's pretty clear who to resolve first. But you have to think in your head, this is like a frame in a comic book. That's why I use the word frame. In a panel in a comic book, like you don't see every step that the hero takes, right? You see him on that side of the street running this way. And then in the next frame, he's already over here punching the villain and the villain is knifing him simultaneously. That's a frame, right? So that's the kind of shit that happens here. Now, when it comes to the meta thing, John and Kevin both. I mean, I think we need to, or we can, because we got the Discord. We've got a place where we can talk about narrative structure as it pertains to investigative, cosmic horror, Call of Cthulhu, that sort of thing. Because I think that here's the critique. I think that you're moving into a very difficult area if you try to stay like Call of Cthulhu and be like Core at the same time. And the problem is not the mechanics. The problem is actually the way that scenarios are structured. If you think Call of Cthulhu, you're picturing a plot line. And that works against everything the core mechanic is trying to build. So I think it's a matter of like taking that plot line, like I said before, breaking it into pieces and trying to view all the pieces. You know, you've got a group of cultists who are maybe they're in a hotel for a convention and they're going to do a ritual and they have all sorts of weird magical shit. Okay, so there's the group, there's the individual cultists, maybe there's an oddball who can be pulled away or gotten information off of or whatever. You've got the hotel staff who are going to notice some weird things about these cult people. You've got where did they get their magical, or maybe there's an herbalist in town. They had to visit the herbalist to get the thing they need for the ritual. So there's another person who's affected by the presence of the cult. There may be strangers on the street who bumped into the cultists and something weird happened and somebody's face turned into jello or whatever. My point is that just because cultist leads to ritual leads to Nyarlathotep doesn't mean that there aren't dozens of affected nodes that you could work your way into the story from all sorts of different directions. And so you take that storyline, you break it into bits, scatter the bits on the table, and you think of them all individually. You go, okay, this hotel owner, what's he about? And what does he think about these cultists who are taking up the third floor? And this herbalist, what's his story? Is he happy they're in town? Did they do something weird? it's not just, this leads to that, leads to that. Because if you think about it, there's all sorts of people and places that were affected by the presence of that. And any one of them could be the first thing you encounter.
Mm-hmm.
So when and I don't do a lot of investigative mystery stuff, but in Day Trippers, there are some big, long-standing mysteries that we occasionally learn a little bit more about. What I do, I don't know if I have an example. No, I have an example, but I don't show it to you. It's got spoilers, Day Trippers spoilers on the whiteboard. But what I do is I'll list a bunch of information. This is not real information. I'm just saying line. It's just information that can be known. I'm not even thinking too hard about where you'll learn it from. It's easier to put things in the mouths of people, because people can be pressured in different ways, different skills, than to put it like in a book, in a box, on a shelf, where you have to find the shelf, choose the book, find the right page. That's Call of Cthulhu type shit. Core doesn't go that way. So I come up with a list of information, and I put little boxes next to each one so I can check them off when the players have learned that. But I don't really think too hard about where they're going to learn it from until we're playing. And I keep looking at it while we're playing, and they've just cornered one of the cultists, and they've got him in an alley, and they're threatening to beat him up. I haven't told him that thing. Okay, I know what he says. Check that off, and I say it. There's no order on this list. It's just dropping information wherever it makes sense. And it depends on what you roll. And sometimes you'll guess it yourself, and I'll go, whoop, you got that one.
Now that's one of the things that we've talked about, especially me and John, in developing Cthulhu into an overall system. Is in general, if you look on any website that deals with RPGs, whether it's Drive-Thru or Itch or DM's Guild or anything like that, the majority of the content is adventures, right? Like that's kind of what people can write for. But like you're saying, like the adventures that come from Core are reflexive. Like they're created almost spontaneously. You can have certain elements that are baked into the world that will feed into the story, but it's difficult to write an adventure ahead of time that doesn't counteract the core of Core, right? And
but it's a lot like the setup of a movie, right? I mean, if you describe, I saw this movie, it was really good. I don't want to tell you about it because no spoilers, okay? But I really think you'll like this movie and you should see this movie. And your friend goes, well, what's it about? Well, again, you don't want to give me any spoilers, but you want to tell them the genre, the characters, a little bit what they're trying to do, and why it's hard. That's the first act. Yeah. The GM sets up the first act. Here's all the shit that's around. But some of it you might not even find.
Yeah.
Which means that it's better for me to keep that information on a separate piece of paper. Right? Yeah. Not linked to this description of this guy or this guy's room, but just floating out there in info space, waiting for you to make a roll that justifies you learning it. Simultaneously, you're moving around my little map of the town here. But the map of the town is kind of like, that's your horizontal control, and this is more about my vertical control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're describing where we go and in what order. That's completely up to you. I'm not railroading. But I do get to have a hand in choosing which moments information gets revealed to you, and that's where the tension comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the big things that we talk about is if you're writing an adventure, and we're primarily talking about me and John talking primarily about pre-written stuff, something that you can write down and give to a person, potentially sell or market or whatever like that. And
the Golden Age Adventures book is what I would point to as an example, right? Because that's where I took the Golden Age Adventures book for Day Trippers.
Yep.
Because that's where I take 16s. They started out as linear stories, and I turn them into what I call plot fields.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I give you in each of those, I give you 3 suggestions for like, here's ways you could work the players into this story.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's a dream world, And that's pretty easy. You're exploring dream worlds and you decided to check it out. But I usually try to come up with 3 very different ways that you could, like, you meet in a tavern, whatever you could, right? 3 different ways that a GM could pull people into this particular storyline. And not all of those ways necessarily put them in the position of the protagonist from the written story. In fact, sometimes I'll put you in the position of the antagonist. I don't know what you're going to do. It's your table. It's your group. So the campaign, or the game rather, that adventure will arise from the same reality as the story that we read. In fact, the text of the stories are included in the book. They're all public domain. I only use public domain stuff. So they're all in there. You can read the original story, see how that went. But when you approach the game, I give you a plot field. It's like a bunch of circles and arrows sort of scattered around. I have no idea which angle your players are going to address it from, who you'll meet first or whatever. These are the NPCs in motion. Here's what they want. Here's where they're going. Here's who they hate. Here's what they're doing. Here's what they're doing in response. That's going to happen whether the players are there or not.
Yeah.
So you can't call it, you can't really call it an adventure. I mean, I call it a plot field. But if you wanted to market it, I think you might call it an adventure setting.
Right. And that's, so that's one of the things. And one, actually, now that so bringing the conversation that me and John has had about Cthulhu, and it's actually now, it's making me think it's with Welcome to the WWA, how it actually would work pretty well with that, and how the basic structure of, like, at least, I think me and you, Kurt, are in the same position where we haven't watched wrestling in a really long time, but it works where if you wanted to get a little more structured in terms of, because like you said, that's more of like a setting, like giving somebody the setting to then develop adventures within. If you wanted to give somebody an adventure to actually run in, almost developing it as a 3-act structure. And you could, as you said, like the general concept that you give somebody, if you don't want to give them a no spoilers intro to a movie, you explain to them basically the first act, right? And then you could have, so that's what you have in the adventure. You say, okay, this is the general, this is how you could bring in the players or whatever you want to do. And then this is generally what should happen in the first act. And then you give them and then you say, okay, once you feel comfortable, or once the players have, the characters have discovered certain things, as you have with your list, like once you've checked off like 3 of these 5 things or whatever, then, you can move into Act 2 where things get ramped up and they've now discovered things and the story evolves. And then once certain things have happened in Act 2, now you move into Act 3, which is the finale of it, with the conflict, the big conflict arises. You have the fight with the BBG or whatever you're playing. That's when they discover the big Cthulhu monster wizard thing, whatever.
And while thinking about the narrative part of Core Complete, I've been doing a lot of thinking about like different narrative structures. I like the Harmon Circle. I use it, but I'm going to break down and approach different narrative structures. And what you're talking about here, when it comes to acts, it could be character based, it could be node based. A node is either a location or an NPC of dramatic significance, or it could be event based, like something uncontrollable, like the war flips the other way. Right. So chapter 2 feels very different from chapter 1 because the war was going good for us in chapter 1, and then the whole situation in the background changes in chapter 2. Now, so that's event based, right? So the way you break down make Act 1 feel different than Act 2, make Act 2 feel different than Act 3. You have a lot of freedom there too. You can base it on a character, like an NPC went through a major change of heart. You could base it on an event that happened, like, oh, the Demogorgons have now mutated to the next stage.
Right.
Or you can make it on a node. You could say, okay, chapter 2 begins when the players make it to Rivendell.
Right, yeah.
It's all up to you.
Yeah.
You can still do it. You can be flexible up to that point. It's like a pinch point where now everything changes. We end one session, we start the next one. It's going to feel different.
Right. And it's funny because the thing that also made me think of it with WWA is that's how like a story arc in wrestling. That's how like you have two wrestlers that are, either working together towards the same goal, or they are, enemies going after the title or whatever like that. And so they have the conflict, and then something turns where something happens and the conflict is escalated. And it's all this behind the scenes fighting and arguing and everything. And then the third act, the final part is like the big fight, the actual wrestling between the two of them.
The thing
That's
that
called a
appeals to
blow
me,
off, Jesse. It's called a blow off in wrestling.
There's a word for it.
So there
The
you
resolution of the final thing is called a blow off.
go. Perfect.
Wow.
There you go.
Shit. The lingo. I fucking love the lingo. Okay, so like that's one of the things I find most fascinating about wrestling is that level of fakeness, right? That the kayfabe story. And then behind the scenes, there's actually it may be a completely different story going on. And that is what I would love to see like elicited more in the WWA game. That feeling that there's, here's the way we treat each other in public. And then behind the scenes, and like you're sort of maintaining two levels of fiction the whole time. It's two games in one, really.
I mean,
that's kind of that's kind of how wrestling is in the first place. Like, you could have these, tag teams, and they look like the best of friends, and they've been wrestling for 10 years,
but they hate each other's guts.
Come to find out in real life, like one cheated on the other's wife, or
exactly.
one is the wife, and like he cheated on her or something like that, or just there's lots of different behind the scenes things.
Yeah, I mean that's what's great is that it can go a bunch of different ways where, like you said, you have two people who on screen are best of friends, but behind the scenes they fucking hate each other's guts. Or the opposite could happen where they're supposed to be enemies and they hate each other, but they're like they go out to dinner and have drinks with each other afterwards all the time. Or their relationship on screen could also be exactly how it is and behind the scenes, where like they really do get along all the time, or they really do hate each other's guts, and that also plays out on screen to the point where
plus the
you have Bret the Hitman Hart spitting on people.
My terrible Josie and the Pussycats example. I mean, they have to go solve the murder or return the queen's crown or whatever. But then they always have to do it before the show because, oh my God, we've only got 15 minutes to make it back.
We still have to perform.
Yeah.
I
love that. The tension between the two different stories is fucking awesome.
Oh, yeah. Well, and there could even be a third thing, which I've seen in real life, where it's like, the heel or whatever is playing this character that's, really giving it to the face. So like the bad guy versus the good guy.
Yeah.
And then in real life, people are like, God, this guy is a real dick, and then they're like, no, they have to like take the time to be like, no, this is actually my character. I don't really think that, you should die in a fiery car crash. Like, this is my persona. Like, you've believed it to the point where you think that I am really thinking somebody should be harmed,
Right. Yeah.
Like actors who play a bad guy in a soap opera, they'll get attacked on the street by old ladies.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, they do call wrestling soap opera for guys. So that's basically
Yep, exactly.
Well, Kurt, why don't you tell us what is the WWA about? Why did you choose woodland creatures as opposed to just like going whole hog and doing like a straight up wrestling game? What's about it?
I think what I wanted to do, well, it's funny because originally what I wanted to do is I wanted to make this into a board game. I wanted to make a fuzzy creatures wrestling kind of little cutesy board game. I thought, God, that just sounds like it'd be fun, because you saw these other little board games where it was like, oh, they're fighting each other kind of like almost like fantasy style faction stuff in this game called Root, and they have a bunch of other games and stuff like that. And I was like, gosh, I really want to do something like that, but make it simple. And I think I even said, like, I gave a bunch of options online. I was like, oh, I really want to see how these, which is the thing that I could do. And the thing that most people were like, they were like, woodland creatures and wrestling. That kind of sounds fun. I was like, okay, good. Well, I want to do that. And then I think I actually got a message from Todd, and he's like, I think you should make a game, like a role-playing game, using Core. I think that's how it started out. Sorry, I have a terrible memory when it comes to these things, but I think that's how it started, And I was like, yeah, I could do that, because I feel like, no, I haven't actually made a board game. I have a ton of board games that are sitting off to the side that I need to finish one day. But I feel like for role playing, it's weird because a lot of people will probably say like role playing games are hard to make. I don't think so. I think that you can make a role playing game like anytime. Now, whether it's a good role playing game, that's something else all in itself. But I've seen even like the smallest of role playing games that are like probably, I want to say 2 paragraphs long, and and I've seen ones that are just phenomenal that way, And I wanted to take a game that could be like that. Take a game that could be an easy one that you could just pick up and play with the core rules. Of course, the core micro rules are really easy themselves, and take this and put it on it. But I wanted to do it where I think this is something I talked about before. It's like, or I didn't want to keep things in a box. So I thought, with having these woodland creatures and wrestling, and like I even said it, I think at the end, like I was like, you don't have to have it just be these couple of things. I'm like, you could have it like, instead of the woodland creatures wrestling in a woodland area, well, let's just say aliens take over, they beam them up, they're in space now, and all these woodland creatures all of a sudden just out of their element, and now they're wrestling in space. Like I just wanted to do something that is kind of silly but also kind of fun, and be like a quick pick up and play kind of thing. And now that Todd has actually asked me to kind of explain some different things about wrestling and kind of come up with a couple of scenarios, got people going, it's gotten my juices flowing a little bit. Now, whether I have the time to do it after, being exhausted from, working for the man, that's another thing in itself. But.
So
But no, I think
coming up.
Yeah.
when I took Day Trippers and stripped it down and created Core Micro, that was one of the things I wanted to be able to say. And I say, so I don't remember how I worded it in the marketing materials, but yeah, if you can trust the basic mechanics of this system, you've played it a couple times, you know how it works, then I really do think you could just take any story that you just read or a movie that you just saw and fucking stat it up for Core in like 30 minutes and run that thing.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be that easy. So a guy like you going, what do I do with my woodland creatures wrestling idea, could like turn it into a Core game really quick. And you did.
I really feel
it's funny when you mentioned, when you talked about like, the kind of the absurdity of taking woodland creatures and throwing them into wrestling. A few things first in my mind. You've already mentioned 2 of them, Mouse Guard and Root. And then the other one that I thought of was a board game called Stuffed Fables, which and you always, and like the premise behind all 4 of those things basically are taking, real life kind of serious things, but like you inject animals in there, and suddenly it brings that level of absurdity that allows you to play with it more. I feel like you can take these serious topics or whatever you're doing, but making it into animals or stuffed animals or whatever you do allows you to not consciously not take it as seriously, and allow your subconscious to kind of take over a little bit more, so you can delve into these topics a little more freely. So I loved that you brought that up, and it kind of like mirrors the 2.
Well, and one of the things I really wanted to do also is kind of open people's mind to using the woodland creatures as part of the story, as far as their physicality and their how they are. So like if you're wrestling a porcupine, like how the hell am I going to wrestle this porcupine? It's gonna the shit out of me. So I got to figure out a way to maybe find its front and keep it in front of me all the time, and just find a way to kind of take it down without it really taking me to town and possibly losing an eye, that kind of thing. or
Yep.
like, you know, having a deer go versus a duck. You know, I mean, it's just, I mean, as absurd as it sounds coming out of my mouth now as I say it, but it's just like how is that gonna actually come out? It's just like if you're watching real wrestling, it's like that big, you know, 8 foot tall guy versus the you know 5'2" nothing guy that's gonna, you know, try to go at the kneecaps until the big guy takes him by the neck and throws him through the ring. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you have
Core,
a
by the
bear
way, was-
versus a chipmunk. How's that going to work out?
Yeah, exactly.
We were talking about earlier about like the level of specificity, the level of detail, how grain size and the dice skills and all that kind of shit. Like how much detail do you really need? And I didn't actually say it, but I guess I'll say it here because maybe it's clear from the way that we're talking. We always describe cinematic stuff when we're talking about core games, and one of the reasons is it's not a real world simulator, right? It is a comic books and TV and movies simulator. And I think that wrestling, for that reason, wrestling with all of its kayfabe and spectacle, totally feeds into that. You know, it's that wacky and flexible kind of logic. It's not, you know, I mean, we hate it when a movie or a TV story like breaks logic completely. But we will give it a substantial amount of leeway if it kind of makes sense and we love the hero.
Yep.
And that's the kind of shit that happens in a core game. It's actually not easy for a PC to die in core. But it is easy for a PC to get wounded in a dramatically significant way.
Reggie.
Because you get story out of that.
Right.
You know? This isn't a game about killing people. Did they die in my dungeon? I don't fucking care. No. We're here to tell a story, and I don't know what it is yet. So the purpose of the system is to give you lots of prompts so that we can together make this story happen.
Yeah. And even Todd, I'd argue with you on one thing you said. You even said that core is a story simulator. I would say that core is more of a story realizer because you're not even simulating a story. In core is simply a base to help you realize what the story is.
I will accept this critique if we back up the tape because I think what I said was genre simulator, and that I'll stand by.
Okay, I'll give you that.
If I said story simulator, then I misspoke because it is a story generator.
Yes, there you go. Exactly.
But what we're simulating is not the real world, but instead the real world of some genre or style of movies or books or television or comics or cartoons. And I don't mean that you have to like literally picture it that way. I just mean the kind of logic where heroes get away with stuff and dramatic changes are actually desired and the norm.
Yeah, I think one of the examples that kind of popped in my head is like, and just because this is the only thing I can think of at the time, like say like a bunch of friends are in a bar or a bunch of friends are like someone's house and one person tells a story and they're like, yeah, we were at a bar and, you know, everything was going great. And then all of a sudden there was just a brush up and they just like all of a sudden just one lady just socked another lady in the face. And then it just went apeshit from there. And then you'll have somebody off to the side, like be like, oh, but I remembered it's weird, but you were watching that. But I was watching, there was some guy and he was leaning on his chair and he's drinking and all of a sudden he fell over. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh my God, I just shit my pants. And then we're like, wait a minute, what? I missed that? You know, that, yeah, you missed it because you were watching that. And then another person's like, yeah, well, you know, I was getting dumped by my wife, you know, that kind of thing. Like we're going to get divorced. You know, it's like one of those things where it's like, you know, everybody is kind of telling the story, even though one person is leading that story, everybody else is kind of contributing to kind of making that world kind of come alive.
You can affect each other too.
Oh yeah.
and you're rarely going to correct each other, which is what often happens in those parties. No, you're remembering it wrong, dude.
But that could be a yes, but could be one of those things. Oh yeah, that happened, but this happened. That kind of thing.
Well, but the general idea is that, okay, I want to generate story ultimately. And stories need meaning, and meaning comes from people connecting their emotions to things. So I want to build a machine that lets people connect their emotions to imaginary things in as many different ways as possible, because as many different kinds of stories as possible, right? Look at the TV, and we need more channels. We need more channels. We want more variety, more stories, more possibilities, more characters, more heroes. And even if they're formulaic, even if we've seen the story before in spandex, now we're watching it in a woolly coat. But that's okay. It's okay. We like stories we've seen before too. It's okay. We want variety and difference and creativity, but we also like the genres and the predictability and the arc. Right? I want to create a machine that lets people make up anything, right? But I want it to kind of make sense, following our logic of entertainment media. And I don't want to tell you how to run your game or build your world, right? The point of core is to give you a system that's so simple and so flexible, you could bring any world to it. And your players, see, it's not just about, here's where we veer from trad, going all the way back to Jesse's first thing, right? In a trad game, the GM buys all the books, reads all the shit, draws all the maps, knows all the info, reveals it as it goes. The GM is like the one who does all the work, spends all the money, has all the dice, and is in command and control of everything. Yeah, we're leaving that. We're leaving that behind. I just want to be able to like get my friends on a chat or call some people over with like half an hour's work based on a cool movie I saw a trailer for yesterday. And I have no idea where the story is going to go, because that's not what it's about. I think this world is cool, and my friends are fucking creative geniuses. I want to build a system that lets my friends be the creative geniuses that they are. It's not about selling a guy a book so he knows that cultist leads to Nyarlathotep.
Bless you.
And maybe I'm missing out on a golden marketing opportunity. I don't know. I mean, but linear plot is not what gets me off. What gets me off is an emerging experience that happens between the minds of the people at the table. And yes, the GM does have a special role, like the therapist in a group counseling session, or the facilitator at a general assembly. They don't really have rank over you, but they have a different job, right? And part of their job is keeping it going if it lags, keeping it moving if it slows down, and eliciting your feelings and your feelings and your feelings to make sure everybody's getting in.
And I think
because it's not about buying a story, right? It's about eliciting that from live people at a table who I don't know when I write the book.
And I think core does a good for specifically what Todd was saying. I think I don't have any worries if I write something and we're going to go play with this group that they're going to fill out the fluff or the story, because everybody's pretty imaginative and creative, right? So core lets John and Jesse and Kurt run wild with their own imagination. But also, if you're playing with a group that people aren't very good at that, they're not good at yes anding or no but, or that kind of thing, the system allows the roles to then guide them and kind of pull that out of them. And I think that's, we always joke around that, we say this is going to take one session. It never does, right? It always goes two, but we're never going to shut that down because everybody's enjoying it and there's new stuff coming into it. But also, if you're playing with a group where you're like, wow, this session's going to be over in an hour, the dice can then guide them to expand that and pull that out of them, where they're like, okay, you swung and you hit, but the mechanic says, okay, you've hit, but there's a consequence to that, whether that's positive or negative. Now you have to describe that. In games we've played with Jesse, it's okay. Well, I rolled, I hit, it's this much damage. That's no fun, right? You want to, I jump up, I spin around. I had a decent roll. So maybe my first swing gets blocked, but the second one hits. The system allows you to then pull that out of people if they're not good at doing that, if they're not feeling it that time, or they're saying, okay, my character's stuck, I can't think of anything. But you've hit, but you've got to do something else. So it isn't just the rote. I roll, I hit, there's damage, and then I back up. So that's the one good thing I like about it, because sometimes I feel that I get stuck not doing that and part of creating it, and the system kind of forces you to do that. So that's a good thing to prod you along.
Well, you only have to think
to
of
get
half
that
of them.
story. Yeah,
right.
It
Right, depends whether you're the GM or the player, right?
Yeah.
But the player is going to say their own positive ones.
Yeah.
GM is going to say the negative ones.
Yeah.
So that means if the player gets a yes and, they're going to tell you what the and is. If they get a no but, they're going to tell you what the but is. But if it's a yes but, the GM tells you what the but is.
Yeah.
If it's a no and, the GM tells you what the and is. So in that sense, the GM is always, I don't want to say adversarial, right? But the GM is the one who's thinking about the bad shit that might happen if you fuck this up, right? So as a GM, you only have to think about what happens if they fuck up, right? The bad. The player is the one who's responsible for thinking about the good. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you ask a player who has like no experience at all, and you say, oh yeah, you did the thing and another good thing happens, what is it? I think it's easier to make up a yes and than to butt yourself.
Well, yeah, because you don't want to be, if your character, you don't want to say, okay, well, my arm falls off. You always want the positive outcome. So it's the GM's role to do that. Okay, you did it, but there is going to be a negative outcome, right? Because any player is going to say, well, my negative outcome is I get 3 extra wishes instead of just 1, right? They're always going to try to save their own skin. So.
Yeah, and I think that if I told you you got a yes but, and you have to tell me the but that you just rolled, now all of a sudden your mind gets tangled. If you're an ethical person, your mind gets tangled up going, well, how far can I take this? I mean, I don't want, where's the line? It's hard, right? Whereas if I tell you yes and, even if you said the most ridiculous thing, you said, and the enemy drops dead right in front of my eyes. Like that. Well, we all get a good laugh. And if in a certain game, if we're down to the wire, I might even agree with you. But even if I don't agree with you, I recognize that as a joke. We all have a good laugh. And I say, tone it down a notch. And you say, and you say something more reasonable, like I hit him for an extra hit point, or I hit him right in his old war wound and he goes down. It's easier to make up an and than it is to cut your own success. And if you go too far, it sounds funny and it's a joke. We all get to blow off a little steam. And if you don't go far enough, it's also kind of cool. You can just add some color. Sometimes you can't even think of anything. It's like, okay, well, I landed the helicopter exactly where I needed to land the helicopter. And the GM goes, and what? And my hair looks great.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
and I think so.
I was just to speak to Kevin's point, because he's offhandedly referencing our D&D game. I feel again, because at least a few of us have played so much core that infuses even that game, where we do tend to go that extra mile. And sometimes you roll the dice first to see like, all right, well, is this description going to make sense? Right. I run up the, wushu style, run up the tree and dive and spin with my sword. I roll a 2. Right. So maybe roll the dice and then, express the fiction, right? Because it's going to be determined by that die roll. But I feel like we're in that headspace when we play games now, no matter what those games are. It's just colored everything, but it is difficult. So I'm going to jump back to what you were saying before about the plot fields and everything else, to sort of break the mold of, okay, well, I got to go from A to B to C, and I have this logical 3-act story, and I kind of know where everything is going, it's hard to break from that habit because
In a traditional
we're
adventure
just so
module,
used to doing
yes.
that. Yeah.
But if you're making up your own world, then you probably just wrote it as a sort of a scattered list of objects in the first place. Just let it remain a scattered list of objects.
Well,
Because
Well,
like
so
if there's a
what I-
point, there's a point in the story where the heroes must figure out that I don't know that the herb they got something called moonbane, and moonbane corresponds to this god, and sudden that's important. Like we need to make that connection somehow, and I haven't figured out how, but I know that that's a thing. It's on my list. But honestly, as long as the players aren't sitting still in their hotel room, and by the way, I can think of ways to make them move. As long as they move around, come on. The GM can come up with a not insane way to put this information somewhere they happen to find it.
Mhm.
So
But
you've
I
got
think-
your info, it's just in a different order, and you're not railroading anybody.
Right.
Well, but even the adventure that I'm working on, that a couple of these guys are playing, and even though it seems to be on the outside somewhat linear, and in some sense, I suppose it is. Any of the locations, other than the starting location, is on the table in a theoretical field. They could go anywhere to do the things, right? Like they're not being driven from place to place, even though it may seem that that's the case. You know what I mean? Like it's open to where they go. Some of those things, unlike what you're saying, some of those clues or actions or whatever may be sort of tied to certain locations. But if they wind up not going to that location at all, either they don't get that bit of information, or you just take it and you throw it somewhere else, like you're saying. Oh, they bump into some guy who bumped into the whatever, and like, oh yeah, I saw this weird guy and he was mumbling something about Moonman or whatever the fuck. Then you can always just recycle that clue from another location if it doesn't seem like they're going to go there at all, or if it's really not important for them to solve it, you just let it go.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I think you're in discussing linearity. I don't know how you'd put it, but
I think linearity sounds right.
Linearity, I like that. I think having a 3-act structure doesn't technically means that you're moving in a line-ish, but just because you have kind of an arc that goes from point A to point B to point C doesn't mean that it's linear. You're still not railroading. You're not making them go anywhere. It's just there is a plan. Like even like in an adventure, usually there's going to be a bad guy or something else on the other side of the characters, right? There's a plan there. That person or that thing or that group or whatever is going to move in a fashion that they believe is going to happen, right? And so having that, introduction to escalation to conflict is just a general motion of a story. And
Right.
so
This is
having
when I say
that planned out into certain
this should be a
aspects
system
doesn't
that
mean
generates
it's linear.
stories, right? What does story
Exactly.
mean when I say that? Well, it already means all the shit that you just said. We know this.
Yeah.
Like if you,
Right.
I mean, it might take some work to elicit that from the average person on the street, but intuitively, they already know it, right? A story is
Exactly.
a series of events narrating a change of something over
Mhm.
time,
Right.
which has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And from that story, you draw a meaning, because the end is what tells you what happens if you start at the beginning and do what the hero did.
Right.
That's how you get meaning. So that's how we relate to the world. Humans, I mean, what's his name? Yuval Harari has this great rap that he does over and over again every time he's interviewed anywhere about how humans are like the narrative ape. This is the way we think of things from our own lives to our countries and our histories and our cultures, our ethnographies and everything. We remember things by creating a little narrative in our head. It doesn't really matter if it's true or not, right? Like most Americans walk around with this little narrative in their head about, land of the free, home of the brave, shining beacon to all the huddled masses and all this. Just a narrative. It's not a story, but stories come from it. Stories come from assuming it, because we all assume these stories. We know it's what a story is. It has things with a beginning and middle in it. So when I say the system is a story generator, I guess I haven't spelled out explicitly that I mean you can sit down with the intent of doing a thing with a beginning, middle, and satisfactory end. And this system will help you do it.
And what's funny too is, and I think this is in conversations that we've had kind of behind the scenes, and potentially an insight into what will be the GM's guide, or part of the GM section at least. But a lot of the advice that we get from Todd about how to run core and what goes on and everything is just really good general GM advice. And it's stuff that we've heard from, or at least I've heard from other sections about how, like, as you said, for some people, D&D is the only RPG that exists. And so a lot of people are looking to mold that into different things. And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, if instead of a static DC, you have like a yes and or a no but, and depending on where they fall, and you do this and this, and more narrative combat and everything. And everything that they say is what core does. and it's very interesting that all of the advice that I hear people give about how to be a better DM or how to run a better game, is the advice that you give on how to run core better. And it's advice that then is reflected mechanically from the system. So it's almost like core is the living embodiment of like good GM advice.
I hope so. I mean, I don't know if that's rather egotistical of me to say it's the embodiment of good GM. Yeah. In the same way that Apocalypse World is the embodiment, isn't Baker GM very much to embody to make core body exhibit, suggest, and definitely not contradict my own beliefs about the GM's role the way that I see it. Mm-hmm. And I would never say that that's the only way for a GM to be.
Oh, no, absolutely, yeah.
I kind of had to make up a word, right? Like I'll call myself an experientialist narrativist. And now, I have to spend 15 minutes of your life explaining what that means and why I did that. But the fact is that, I know it is a unique style, but it is a style that comes from thinking for years about what I really want at the table. Mm-hmm. And the answers to those questions almost always have more to do with meaning, emotion, and style than they do with numbers. Do you use dice or cards? Do you big math or little math? Mm-hmm. The answers never come from there. That's not where the enjoyment comes from. The enjoyment comes from the meaning, and the meaning has to do with the spurred creativity of human minds. So I want to give them that and remove everything that's not helping.
Yeah. No,
and
but
I think that's sort of like Vincent's principles make sense. If you're that kind of GM, you look at him and you go, well, of course that makes sense. So if you're a narrativist who cares about the meaning and experience of your players, then you'll look at core, or you'll look at the way that I run it, and you'll go, oh well, yeah, obviously.
No. And it's funny, one of the big things you always hear is like, even though I'm not patting myself on the back, but it's something I've done ever since I started running RPGs, well, D&D specifically, but like with Matt Mercer, and he does the, every time they kill a big enemy or anything like that, he's like, how do you do it? And it's like that yes and aspect. So it's like, you did it, and then what? And it's like the potential for that is baked into every single time you roll the dice in core. Like you have the potential
also
to
D&D,
to emphasize.
We were talking about the difficulty levels, and now in D&D you choose this.
Right.
You can choose a stat, an ability, tell the player to beat this DL. You're playing core right now, or Cypher, or one of them.
Right.
I mean, all of the good ideas that have happened in 5e are actually they took a look over at what indie games have been doing for the last 10, 15
absolutely.
years.
Yeah,
Well,
because they were losing
and that's
ground.
what I was doing too. I mean, I was looking at Apocalypse World, and I see. I mean, it's not original with me, but it wasn't original with Vincent either. The whole idea of fruitful void. Put fruitful void wherever you can. Ask.
You're going to have to explain
questions.
that one for me.
A fruitful void is the space left by a leading question. Like in Day Trippers, when I say, there was something about that dream you had that really bothered you, though. What was it? Okay. So the question is leading you into a place. I'm like pacing and leading you. And then I leave you with this open-ended void that you have to fill in. But it's fruitful. It's fertile because I've given it a feeling and a context. And you can probably come up with something. Yeah. Because the reason I put the word experientialist before the word narrativist is because, yes, I am attempting to make us an arc with a beginning, middle, and end. Yes, this is character-driven changes over time. All that's true. But if it ever comes down to a conflict in my head between you having the smoothest narrative arc or you, the player, having the best emotional experience for you. Like if you like being scared, then I want to scare you, right? If you want to feel comfort and safety, I want to make you feel comfortable and safe, right? For you, I will always go with the emotion, even if it breaks the narrative, because meaning doesn't arise if you don't connect with the character. If you watch a TV show about a hero that you don't connect with, that you don't care about, it's hard to even remember what the story is. You don't care what happens to him. The only way you're going to get meaning out of this game is if you honestly care. You're emotionally invested in your player character. And I've done everything I can to blur the line between that character and you. So I never want to break your emotional state. And if it deflates, I always want to fill it back up again. That is actually what's making you enjoy the game. That's the thing you can't get out of another medium. Right? You can bond and identify with a character in a movie, but you can't feel what it feels like to make that decision and then, oh my God, I have to roll the dice. The tension of that decision in the story pulls the tension of the dice in your hand right now. You know, the dice are only there to support story. If there's nothing emotive or narrative, don't roll dice. Just say what you're doing.
We usually don't.
Yeah.
Well, so let's pause for a minute. We talked about WWA a little bit. Jesse, you've got one game out. You've got another game coming out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, they're full of tables, so you can. No, so the first one stemmed from my lack of wanting to stray too far from the familiar. And so I stayed in the slightly medieval fantasy realm, and it was the podcast, the game that we were currently running, Monster Hunt anyway, it was pretty much based off of that. And even some of it was mechanics that I was kind of already using in terms of the hunt and all that kind of stuff, and I basically just took them and cored them. And so Monster Hunt is about hunting monsters. So, you stray out into the wilderness, you track monsters, you do all that kind of stuff. You roll on a bunch of tables, you find out some stuff, and then eventually you fight, giant, not kaiju style, but like dinosaur style, sized monster stuff. We've run it a couple of times, actually, in a differently named game that I will eventually roll WWA into. I swear.
I don't believe it whatsoever. I mean, you could say third time's a charm, but yeah, whatever.
Well, look, the second
Listen,
time it
if
was
we
totally our fault.
Right.
If
I could run a session where introducing the characters takes less than an hour, then maybe we can actually get down into
Well,
it.
you're really gonna have to get on our asses then, because I don't ever see that happening either.
Right.
Yeah, those characters we created were
What's fun
pretty
is I
over
actually
the
think
top.
it'd be
So.
I think it'd be kind of easy to approach it from the opposite direction. Like I could picture starting from Day Trippers and ending up on WWA World. That's a piece of cake.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Well, that's what we were trying for.
That's what I was trying for. But after 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So I had that and so yeah, I've run it a few times. In running it, I've made a couple alterations. There's a second version up there now with much more simplified wording. Because as you said, Todd, I got that GM haze, and you always want to kind of max everything as much as you can. And when running it and also talking to John about it, ended up just taking it, simplifying a bunch of the mechanics and the general wording of everything. So yeah, that's out there. Download it if you want. Don't pay anything for it. It's not worth it. But then there's Runners that is going to come out soon-ish. Who knows? We'll see. But that is my detestment of medieval fantasy and wanting, and I'm done with it. Basically, I've run enough. My entire RPG life has almost been in that kind of genre, and so I'm done with it. And it was a combination of kind of my interest in the Day Trippers world, in that kind of technology level, and especially like Ubiquity and what you've done with that, and also my interest in games like oh crap, I can't remember the name of it. The one that's like future D&D where you're like people running missions to break into stuff and everything.
Blaze in the Dark.
No. Oh man, I can't remember. Now.
It must have really left a
it did
positive influence on you. Can't even remember really.
You're looking at
really.
No, you're looking at ADHD brain that can't remember names of stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're
talking about Shadowrun.
Shadowrun. Boom. There we go. Yes. Yeah. So you're looking at like. Yep. So yeah, it's a combination of like Shadowrun, of like running mission type stuff, and then for some reason like mech suits and everything got tossed in there with my brain and everything. That's
fucking hysterical, man. One of the reasons it took me so long to think of Shadowrun was I don't see any Shadowrun in Runners at all.
No. No, that was more so like the mission based aspect of it. In Shadowrun, it's like, okay, you get a mission, you plan for that mission, you do that mission, and then you return home and get the reward. In theory.
Right. But so is that's Top Secret. So
very true. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
So an adventure is a mission, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, I mean, the reason that I find those types of games interesting, very similar to Day Trippers. In theory, Day Trippers is a single session, maybe a couple sessions adventure type scenario, right? You get a mission or exactly, yeah. So you get a thing, you get a mission, or you want to discover a planet or whatever like that. You get the mission, you go to the mission, you do some exploring, you come back, right? But what you can do
if your players go with you when you prompt them along,
exactly, yeah.
Then ideally, the last die roll of every Day Tripper session should be the trip home.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so the one thing that the one other thing that I was really interested in with doing runners was the shipbuilding segments of Rogue Trader. I actually really and to a similar extent with Day Trippers. Although with Day Trippers it's far less crunchy than Rogue Trader. It makes sense that it is.
The Day Trippers inspiration was Car Wars.
Oh, really? Oh, so there we go. Yeah. I'm gonna have to read up on that now. So with with Rogue Trader, it had, you have weights and sizes and it throws all in and, power requirements and everything. And I kind of wanted to, the balance, even though there was, lists of hundreds of things for Rogue Trader and you could plug everything, pages upon pages upon pages. I was still very interested in that kitschiness of it, of building your own thing and making it yours. And, this is my suit. There are other suits, but no other one quite like that one.
Right.
And,
mine. Yeah. And the ships in Day Trippers are the same thing. They're like, if you get to the point or if you get a client or a sponsor or whatever, to where you can build your own ship.
Mm-hmm.
You're legit invested in that ship, and you make design decisions for the comfort of your imaginary person.
Exactly. Yeah.
That ship is just as much an expression of the group's identity as your PC is.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
I love that about. I like games that do that. That's why I absolutely needed to steal something. It gave me that feeling in Car Wars when you built your own car and there was no other car like it. Yeah, everybody looked at the same lists, but only you decided to use, a 1979 Dodge Charger and put the guns this way.
Right. Yeah.
And every ship was going to be unique in Day Trippers, and I love that about runners too, because you're invested in that suit. You didn't just choose a bunch of weapons. You helped design what you look like when you're out there being badass.
Right. And that's actually one of the main reasons too. I initially, when I was designing, the character sheets and everything like that, I was going to have one single sheet where you had your character stats up top and your suit stats on the bottom. But ultimately, I wanted to make the suit feel like a separate character almost, where you built that. It was like I said, it's unique. And it's a thing unto itself. And so that's why I ended up, deciding to invest more space in the book, but give it its own due.
Yeah. I mean, actually, if you look at Car Wars as an example, and I did play Car Wars campaign style, you can do it, but your car is about 10 times more complex than you are.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah.
The PC is like 4 numbers, and a couple adjectives or something like that. PCs are dirt simple, and the car is like, a sheet of paper and a notebook with like tabs and pointers. But again, it's a chance for you to express your individuality, and whenever you put your creative energy into the thing, you're now emotionally invested in it. So anytime the GM can come up with a logical reason that isn't too much work, It makes a lot of sense for you to build, customize, alter, modify, make a mark in the world. Do it. Right? Because it makes your players more invested in the world. And then from then on, it's like every time you get hypnotized, it's easier to get hypnotized. Every time you role play, it's easier to sink into your role next time. It's the same thing. Every time you step into a world you have affected, it's easier to feel your effect in that world. I had a character in my D&D campaign. He was a cursed troll. I let him play a troll. He was chosen by the god of war. This is like a level 20 campaign. Seriously fucked up shit happened in this campaign. But the point I want to concentrate on is that when he was sort of abandoned by his god at one point. It was a heart-wrenching experience for him. And he found an area on the map that was like a giant forest. And he went there and he spent weeks uprooting all of the trees in like a 10-mile radius. He was strong enough to do it. And I made him roll a bunch of them for a little while, and I realized, no, he's going to clear this whole fucking area out. We just went into downtime at that point. And he uprooted all of the trees, and then he dragged them to form a letter M. His name was Moog. And he made a 10-mile tall M on the map. Okay, it's big enough. A hex is 10 miles across. It was one hex on a letter M. I put it on my world map. You can let your players go that far. If they're willing to go that far, you should let them go that far. When they make a mark on the world, that world is part of them. And anything you can do to customize it or baroque up that expression, it's a link between them and the world. It's an emotional bond. And that's really what you want. We don't talk about it much. We use words like immersion, verisimilitude. We get very clinical, but it's about emotions. This is about emotionally bonding, emotionally manipulating each other into states that we find pleasurable. And part of it is the moment, but part of it is that arc, a narrative curve that makes sense. God, that feels so good. We love doing it, and this is a system that helps you do it with each other. And feel it.
That's one thing. I had a question before, and I think now is a good time to kind of to use it. So we were talking about before with the yes and the no button and everything like that, and what kind of advice would you give? Because it was difficult for us to kind of get into as players being able to have that little bit of narrative control. And now we're kind of used to it and we're prepared for it. But in people getting into core, say it's their first time or second time getting, playing, what advice would you give to prepare for being ready to take that temporary narrative control as a player, more importantly, how to as a player, yeah, and because GMs are kind of used to that, right? At least, but as a player, taking that narrative control temporarily, and as a secondary to that, disconnecting it from that specific moment or action. Because I think that's one thing that even me and John still have issue with is a yes and can technically be used to control, really not control, but to affect anything around you. And it doesn't have to be tied specifically to that action at that moment.
True.
So what advice would you give to kind of gradually, or maybe just rip the Band-Aid off, of having that type of control as a player?
For the player, some people, again, I'm going to draw another parallel to hypnosis. There are a lot of parallels between game mastering, at least in an experiential sense. If you're an experientialist game master, you are probably already the sort of person who has thought or maybe even studied a little bit of hypnosis. You're interested in depth psychology. You have an interest in symbolism. And all this shows in your interest in literature and narrative structure. And these are all kind of tied together. Even magic, like Kabbalah or the Golden Dawn. These are symbolic ways to communicate rich, complex meanings. And so people with a certain type of brain, there's like a cluster of things they often tend to be interested in. Certain sort of systematized, obsessive minds sort of go toward instantly bonding with the mechanics of a system. Those people are GMs. There's other people whose minds can quickly and easily sink into a suggestible state, like people who are easily hypnotized. They're often very creative people themselves. There's a lie that that stupid people are easier to hypnotize and smarter people are hard. That's actually not true. The people who are best at going into hypnosis are actually fairly intelligent, creative people. Better if they've suffered some trauma in their life or have some experience with dissociation. So there are some people who naturally sink into a role. I'm answering your question, believe it or not. There are some people, like a bell curve, who sink into it immediately. Like the first time they role play, they understand intuitively where the boundaries of their character are and what the kind of experience is that the GM's going for. And that's like maybe, the top 10%. And they just sort of sink into it and know what to do. They will talk of themselves in first person when speaking in character. They will say I, etc. At the opposite end, you've got people who have a really hard time sinking in. They'll always say he. They're probably more drawn to the math than to the feelings and experience. And my style might not actually work too well for them. They might want to argue with me about like arrow ranges or, D&D type shit. They have to just relax. I'm not sure at the far end of the spectrum if this is even the game for them. But in the middle, you got most people. And most people, even if they've never played a narrativist game, they have seen hundreds and hundreds of movies and TV shows and comic books. They know whether they've thought about it or not. They have an intuitive understanding of symbolic and narrative logic. So all you really have to do is describe it to them like it was a movie. I often literally will talk about the camera shot. I will talk about how the camera pivots and moves and zooms in or cuts to. Tell me what the next scene is. And you're picturing it like a movie. And for that reason, it's easier for you to go, oh, I know what the next scene is. So that works for me a lot, to describe things in cinematic terms. This is something that the GM can do, but it's also something the player can do. If the GM's asking you a question, just try picturing it. Because this is a fiction-first game. Don't look at your sheet. That's just going to confuse you. Don't look at your sheet. Picture what's happening in your head. This guy that we're saying you are, you know him, right? What's he feel like? What kind of guy is he? Oh, here we are. Here's the moment. What does this guy do? If they're feeling it and seeing it, you're just asking a very simple question. What does this guy do right now? What's the next scene you see? If they're the first kind of player, they'll already be there. They're already embodied. They'll say, I do this. I always try to talk to players in their character's name. Because if I've got one of those people who's there, I don't want to break that. John always says he. So he can break it if he wants to. But I don't want to break his. You know what I'm saying? That's a question for him. So I always talk to you in your character's name. I want to keep you in there. If you're one of those people, I want to keep you in there. If you're not one of those people, I haven't harmed anything. You can say I, you can say he. It doesn't really change stuff. You may be picturing it through his eyes. Or you may be picturing it like you're sitting in a movie watching it. I don't care. Either way, whatever works for you. But if you're picturing it, you have an easy time answering just this one little question. What does this guy do in the next scene? Don't look at your numbers. Don't think about dice. Just tell me what you see in your head. And then we'll roll it. Then we'll figure out what dice to use. It's fiction first. So I guess that's my best advice. Picture it in your head and just say whatever the next scene is. Don't think about dice at all. The GM will tell you. He'll figure it out. That's the GM's job.
I guess the big thing too is don't be afraid to fail, right? I mean, you're saying it's about the fiction, so it really is what would the character do.
Oh, it's hard to die, and
how
let's
do you
face
see-
it, that in almost all media you've ever seen, one of the protagonists will do something wrong, put themselves in jeopardy. This usually happens in Act 3. Right? It's part of it. Part of the learning experience is fucking up. It's hard to die in this game, but it is easy to get hurt and learn a lesson from that. And that's what we want.
Found that out in the Megamon game.
Yeah.
All right, well, we should probably really move towards wrapping this up. We're pushing 2.5 hours. I do want to ask Kevin, since you did run a couple of scenarios that you created for Call of Cthulhu, as of yet unpublished. Had you played them before you ran them for Core Cthulhu, or was that like out of the box playtest for that?
Yeah, so I have a whole bunch of different ideas for different things I wanted to write, and those were two that I had gotten written. That sounds terrible. That I had written, so I figured it would just slot in perfectly for the Core Cthulhu stuff. So, that was the first go. Everybody seemed to have fun, so hopefully that was successful. The ending of the second one we ran, I thought was really, really cool. That we put the characters in a position where they can make a choice about what they wanted to do. And that was something that I hadn't really thought about when I wrote it, right? That just came out from the gameplay. Mm-hmm. And I think John's character really played into what his character went through for life. So the decision he made, I think it worked out really, really good. And I think Kurt's character also played into his situation of his character's life. And I thought it worked out really, really well. So I was happy.
That scene was great. It's lovely when a plan comes together, right?
It wasn't even anything I had planned.
I know, but that's one of those. That's why I prefer not knowing what the end is and going in with so much up in the air, because ultimately, if I knew what it was going to feel like or what I was going to do, it's kind of like a magic show. It's like I rehearse my thing and I do my thing. That's not. I want to be surprised too. I want accidents to inform the fiction too. And when something like that happens, because you were open to it and John was open to it, it's just like click, click, these two pieces fit together. And oh my God, we've got a powerful emotional moment right here. Let's ride with it. And absolutely. I would say one thing that you recognized immediately that's very core is the moment that accident happened, you took it and made it the focus of the scene for the next minute. Because now John's feeling it. And that's the whole point.
Yeah, it was really good.
Great
I was really happy with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoy the way that played out. I don't know if you had intentionally chosen the rise and fall of the Third Reich, but as soon as it came out of your mouth, I knew what was going to happen. It was perfect. I loved that the whole way that played out.
The ending was just going to be a more, not rote's the wrong word, but it was more of a, if you guys decide to go with this choice, this is what happens. If not, this is what happens. But then making it personalized, I thought it worked absolutely perfectly. And then just the fact of what John's character went through in the First World War, which obviously the Great War, right? He didn't know it was I think we played that up saying the First World War.
Can I ask, was there a life shipper tied to this? I don't know.
I don't remember what his life shaper was. He had been a World War I vet for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
It might have been something like Life is Cheap or something.
I think that's what it was. There was,
something tied to his war service, I think.
And then giving him the option of not having to deal with all of that. And just when we started talking about the wars, I was just trying to think about those seminal works when John's character had learned about, well, there another war after this war? No, that's the war to end all wars. That was the book that popped into my head, was Shira's book about the rise and fall of, it's what, like 1,400 pages.
Oh,
So
it's huge, and the pages are real thin.
so it's a definitive history of that. So yeah, I was super happy the way that played out. And each of the three characters, the decision they made kind of completely slotted in with how they were playing their character. So it was really
Absolutely. Again, that was a very core moment, and you can design for those moments, right? You can build a situation like that where you have no idea what they're going to say, and in a way it doesn't matter, but you prime it in such a way that whatever they do say is almost guaranteed to be psychic content, almost guaranteed to be emotionally meaningful. And then once they give that to you, if this is an ongoing campaign, it may be tied to a life shape or it may not. But because it's emotionally meaningful, you might want to note it down and then hit that note once in a while as a GM. It makes the character feel realer and stronger and deeper as a real human being. Like, I don't whip it out every time, but I know that, Jack Nash is also a character with a dark thing haunting him from his military past. And, every once in a while, I'll tell him about a nightmare he has or a situation he's in that I'm like deliberately playing up to remind him of the time his squad got killed in the jungle and it was his fault. So whenever a player gives you those moments, you're going to use them. So as a designer or as a module writer, you can put things like that in, the wishing well, the mirror that shows you your truest desire, the book which when you look into it, it tells you the darkest thing about your own past that nobody knows. Just fucking fruitful void, man. Here's a fruitful void for you. Fill it in.
Now, having run them, Kevin, are you interested in converting them to core? I know we talked about it a little bit. Is that something that you want to reshape then and release as adventures for core, or do you want to stick with Call of Cthulhu?
No, so the only issue I have is, so I've written them all out. My biggest stumbling block is to make sure they fit whatever format for core, right? So whether it's stat blocks for each of the sections, right? So that's where if there's another core scenario or adventure out there that I can see how it's laid out, then I'll just plug it over. So I wrote them obviously for Call of Cthulhu because I wanted them to be Cthulhu. I didn't want them to, so that's why they were Call of Cthulhu. So if someone has a template of how to corify them, then I'll just plug it in. So I have it all written out and all the stuff we have. It's just like, okay, now what do I have to put in here for core? Instead of roll investigation, it's, do the core rolls, which is fine. So, that's, and John and I talked about it before. So if I could steal someone's already finished one and see how they've mapped it out, then I'll just do the same thing for those two and make sure they fit like a template of what it is for core.
I think so far no one's done this for core because again, I've been releasing settings, and then it's kind of like this is a sandbox, right? The GM and the players are gonna decide what the stories are. I'm giving you the setting, so there aren't any actually like what I would call quote unquote adventures for core, but there are adventures for day trippers, and so I'll choose. I'm not sure which one right now, but I'll choose a good example. How should I get it to you?
Well, just if you put the link in the Discord, I can go grab that because I'm on there, or send it. But so that's the only thing, right? So I want to make sure that I have it in a format that everybody's happy with, right? So I take out the investigation roll or the sanity roll, and I put in the core pieces of it. The equivalent roll. So that's the only thing that I would want to do. And then, for the two of them, it's just, I want to make sure that those sections, whether they're asides or, detail, GM info or character info, that kind of stuff. I just want to make sure it makes sense, that it fits in with, and as I told John before, the only reason I wrote it for Call of Cthulhu because it was a Cthulhu game. So it wasn't a Delta Green game because it was in the 20s, right? So what are you going to write it for, kind of thing?
Well, even,
No,
there,
makes
so
there
even
was
you
no
know,
core Cthulhu at the time.
talking about the I don't mean to like keep harping on or bringing up like 3 acts and stuff, but like only because it fits into what me and John were talking about for his adventure and all that kind of stuff, and it's just general narrative, arcing. But like, you could, break it down into, for the recent adventure that we did with like the farmhouse and everything. The first act is getting the characters introduced and having that issue brought up with the radio, and then discovering that. And once they have enough information that they have their next lead, act 2 is is going into the farmhouse and having all that happen, right? Kind of the exploration and everything of that. And then the turn into act 3 is when the weird stuff starts to happen. Yeah. Right. When, the discovering of the body, when that alien comes down and everything. And that's the turn that then, brings in all the conflict and brings you into that final down pitch.
So
and
an event-based structure at that point. You're basically going, when the PCs generate this event, we flip into Act 2.
Exactly. Yeah. And I actually think that place, that structure plays in well to what we were talking about with Cthulhu about the ramping of sanity rolls, and like and so that the turns could even be associated with climactic moments that bring on enough stress that a sanity roll is needed.
Oh,
and
you know what?
It happens that third act is when they then get compounded, and you just start getting slammed one after another with the build of that, that arc into it.
When we were talking about the different kinds of structures you might hinge on, I said node-based, event-based, character-based. There was one more that dawned on me. You just kind of walked right into it, and that was player-based, basically. You want to say experiential state-based, right? So you could, like, let's say you're doing a horror thing, and that they're down for it. They want to be scared.
Yeah.
You could hinge your acts on, like, okay, Act 2 happens the first time somebody gasps at the table. Like, we will go into Act 3 the first time somebody expresses discomfort. You could literally hinge it on something like that.
Absolutely. Because at that point, like you talked about breaking that, breaking down that barrier between player and character, and how, we all are basically experiencing a character through our own moments and our own experiences anyway. And so, especially in a horror type game or something like that, you're not trying to elicit fear out of the character. Like, you're trying to get that feeling out of the player. Right?
You hope so. Otherwise, you're playing like a Scooby-Doo.
Having those turns happen when it with a character's, with a player's realization or a player's action makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
Right, and that is why I think Core is a great match for cosmic horror, but even much more than, underlined 3 times in red, trigger warning. Because this game will not only take you to uncomfortable places and talk about, disgusting things, but the mechanics of the game, if done right, will literally dive deeper into your subconscious and engage you on an emotional level. I would not run anyone in a horror scenario at all without letting them know beforehand, this is going to be a horror scenario. And I run bleedy games. I'm going to creep you out. I'm going to scare you. Are you okay with that? Do you want that? If you don't want that, we'll play something else.
Right, and that should be standard procedure, right? I mean, if you're not playing with your,
I think if you're playing D&D, like if you're playing D&D 4 for sure, right? It's like you're about as emotionally involved as you are in chess. You're measuring and you're moving and you're doing math. Right? We don't have to worry about, but in Day Trippers or in Core, literally the game master is instructed to watch you for psychic content and reincorporate that, amplify it, and use it to bond you emotionally with your character and to get feelings out of you. Right? And it's like I said really early in the show. It's a type of play. And I wouldn't ever say that it's the type of play everyone should do or that it's the best for everyone. But if you're interested in deep immersion, if you like bleed, if you like being creative and spontaneous, it's designed to facilitate all of those things and stay the fuck out of the way.
I feel like we should really end on that, but man, I want to give Cthulhu a plug too, right?
Well, you know what? In a way, we've been dancing around Cthulhu this whole time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it is more than any of the other core games that's come out, with maybe the exception of Day Trips. But Day Trips gets weird and it gets all in your head. But Cthulhu has a very specific flavor in mind, and that's what we've been talking about: how to work with an open-ended structure in a horror genre.
Yeah.
I mean, Kevin's done it. I've done it in different ways, and Cthulhu is the place to go for it.
And even with it's so it's my homage to all those games, right? Like it's Trail of Cthulhu and Fear Itself and Call of Cthulhu and all that sort of stuff. All the games that we've enjoyed and played, but it is very 3-act structure, A to B to C, clue trail. Your bad guys doing this thing, summoning.
Yeah, it's not the act, but you know this because I use the Harmon Circle. It's not the acts that are a problem.
Yeah,
it's not even having beats. Having beats isn't a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Having beats is only a problem if you string them in a row, and that's the only way.
Right.
Exactly.
And I haven't run it enough or created enough like singular adventures to run. So like we've been running Cthulhu as a series of one-shots. There's no interconnection, even though there is, an element for campaign play. You've got downtime recovery, the trauma aspect of it is for longer term gameplay, over multiple sessions, not a single, because one adventure may take 2 sessions, especially with us. But it's not going to have that much of an effect on a character within that very specific time frame, but it does then begin to overall influence the way the character behaves or how you want to role play a character. So we haven't really tested that, I feel like, but I think it works, right? Because that's just a role play thing. So like if you're down for that works. The shock stuff definitely works in the short term as it's intended to. But as we had been talking once before, you could strip out all of the investigative elements and use Cthulhu to run a slasher flick. You're stuck in a haunted house and there's demons, because now the characters are surrounded by and butted up against the horror, the weirdness. So everywhere they turn is something that's fucked up. Make a psyche roll. There's a dead body. You see the guy in the corner. Oh wait, is that a shadow or is that a person or whatever? So you can run it in
my models when I'm discussing the plot field. I'm always imagining a network of objects loosely connected and floating around, and then I always talk about the players coming in from any angle. But what you're pointing out is very valid, that actually the players might just be sitting there, shit starts coming toward them.
Well, I think the 2 that we played obviously were a bit more investigative heavy, and the first one we played especially, and that was the feedback we had, was there was a lot of slow build up to the end. The second one, we tried to do a bit more action in the middle. It's not just a straight Call of Cthulhu investigative.
My biggest hit for that is, look, man, there may be times where you have to make an informational bottleneck. They suck.
Yeah.
But if you find that your story, your module, your idea, I don't know, if you can't find a way around it, you must make one piece of information that's like totally fucking critical, and there's no way to proceed to the next thing until you get that, then please make it mobile. Make it something you can put in different people's mouths or in a different place.
Yep.
And I think
or don't
John,
hide. Don't. My worst thing was when it's hidden, when it requires a role or a specific question or something like that.
from someone, yeah.
Yeah, if from somebody, and you basically spend half a session waiting for that specific thing to happen. Like
Yeah,
if
exactly.
if
you know you're getting like you're
something is
toward
required, don't hide it.
you're toward the end of Act 2. You've looked at the clock. Maybe you've got only 20 minutes left to play. There's still this one piece of important information. The players are nowhere near the herbalist or the guy who knows the correspondence, and instead they're beating up some bum who tried to pickpocket them in an alley. But somebody, when hitting the bum, rolls a yes and I'm going to go, okay, and at the moment you hit him, he blurts out this whole story about how the herbalist told him not to tell anyone that he was the one that delivered the moonwort to the cultists.
Yeah.
What did you do?
Mm-hmm.
Just put that information right there because it's time.
And I've talked to John before, so I think we worked out, some of the mechanics for Cthulhu. We threw some magic in. There was magic in both of them. I think we did a bit more magic and stuff, and the sanity stuff in the second one. So the next one I want to try to focus more on the action, so it's not the investigative. So I have 3 kind of ideas about what I want to do, and they're also not in that stereotypical 1920s Cthulhu setting. So I'm going to ask Kurt and Jesse and John. So one of them's in the it's like in the 1100s, one is the 1400s, and one is in 1960. And I want to have it more where there's more action for that, away from the investigative. So I want to see which of the three. I'm going to send everybody kind of what the major outline of what those 3 areas would be, and see what they want, the most interested one they want to do, and that's the next one will be. And I'm going to try to put more action into. I think we did do quite a bit of action. There was, but I want to focus less on the look at the microfiche, talk to this person, get the clues, be more an action-packed one. So that's going to be the next one I'm going to write. So
nice.
Intriguing.
But so real going back, John, you were talking about with Cthulhu and how like the trauma plays out kind of in a longer scenario, like multi-adventure type thing, and how if you want, theoretically, you could take Cthulhu, strip it down, and turn it into like a monster horror type thing. And I think this is kind of the great thing about Core Micro, and what I'm assuming will kind of transition into Core Complete, is the adjustability in the piecemeal way that you can set up games. Like if you want, you
options,
could take
baby.
Exactly, yeah. You could take the shock from Cthulhu, right? And if you're trying to create more of an in the moment monster horror type game, remove trauma and throw in something like a freak out table that happens. That happens like right there and then. That's more of an extreme version of shock.
Woodland creatures who reveal their demonic inner selves.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that's the nice thing about Core, in that all, like Jesse's saying, all the pieces are modular. So Kurt and I are working on a noir setting right now. And I said to Kurt, like, shit, we could probably take the monster hunt rules for going on the hunt. So like, making the rolls to like find out bits of information and this and that. You could reskin that as an investigative, almost like sub game, to use that to like, okay, well, I'm beginning this investigation. I'm trying to track down this guy. And modify what's in Monster Hunt and stick it in the Core Noir, and it works, right? It's all the same scale. It's all the same. Dice mechanics. Everything is the same. So hence the Megamon, where we've took Day Trippers and Monster Hunt and WWA and mashed them all together. It's so easy to do within Core to just pull the elements that you're interested in.
When it comes to, I'm going to get a little. I agree with all that, and exactly that's why it's the creative options role-playing engine. All these little parts are modular, like the gears on the cover of the book. But But I wanted to touch on the thing that you were just saying, damn it, and I want to remember what it was. Because it was a really good point. It's that this thing, Kevin brought this up in one of the post shows, I don't remember which one, that it's not just that they're modular. It's also that it's this kind of fractal. You can scale it any way you want. So Kevin was talking about you can make a role for each individual piece of information. You have to go to the right bookshelf, find the right book, flip to the right page. You could make all of that, each one of those steps an individual role. Crank it, stretch it out. Or you make one big roll to see like how well you did in searching this room. Or you could even make one big roll for the whole day to see what all of us found searching this whole house. Mm-hmm. Right? You could scale it to whatever level you need to scale it at. And I think when it comes to the investigative games, that might be a useful tool to think about. Like instead of making you tell me every bookshelf that you look at or everything like that, you just sort of it's like a step into downtime for a little bit.
Well, and I think we lost Kurt. Okay. Okay, we lost Kurt. Like you were talking earlier about,
we've lost Kurt.
Yeah, finding clue. Like, don't hide the clue. And if you're in the room, like in the play test that we're doing for the scenario that I'm creating, they go to the house and they search the study. I don't care which shelf. I look in the room. What do I find? If you roll a yes or yes and you found it, I don't care if you were looking under the desk or in the couch. It's irrelevant. The clue is in the room. The specifics are not.
Right. But if you
tell
want
me what
to,
you're doing fiction wise,
or if you're,
what do you do?
If you're that kind of GM, because there are, and there's a style of play where it's even appreciated that, okay, no, if it was in the third book from the left on the top shelf on the bookshelf, and I know exactly where that is, and you never said you went near the bookshelf, then my lips are sealed.
Yep. Roll me a search check for that wall. Roll me a search check for that wall.
Dumb.
Roll me a search check
or
for
say
that
the
wall.
word, or say the word bookshelf. You never said you checked the book, right?
Yeah.
I'm just waiting to hear the word bookshelf. That's a style of play. It's not my style. But if you want to play at that level, you can use core for it. You can roll every goddamn little thing. You're going to be making up a lot of yes ands. Oh, here's the second thing.
Right.
The graduated scale. Okay, gradated scale. So you don't have to make up a yes and or no but for every single thing. You can just have the players make one big roll, and then you look at the chart and you see what they beat. Right? So how well did you search the room for an hour or whatever? And you come up with an 8. And I look, and you beat very hard. So I sort of decide in my head what information is very hard and what's harder than that. And I tell you everything lower. Okay, you just found all these, list them off. Everything lower than that difficulty on my little list in my head.
Right.
And it allows you to do that without doing like a system that has a point spend, right? Where to get that information, you're going to spend this point or that point. You're just doing it.
No, because the role is like just the same as in action frames. Maybe this will help you think about combat. When you're rolling, you're used to thinking, did I hit him? And you roll to see yes or no. Did I hit him? Okay. Not what's going on in core. In core, everybody rolls at once, and although they're using different mods, different skills, and different stats, everybody's asking the same question. The question is, how well do I do my thing?
Yeah.
This frame. That's what everybody's asking. Yeah. The role is how well you do whatever the hell. So the graduated difficulty is the same thing, right? You search the room for an hour. How well did you do? Roll your dice. Tell me the highest one. Add any bonus that I give you. Okay. Hey, so you found everything 7 or below. And it's not like I have a list. I could have a list, but really most of the time I just kind of like imagine in my head, well, off the list of information I do have, that one's definitely above a 7, but these 3 are below for sure. And I say them.
Yep. I dig it. And then you don't even have to pick a DL. You're just going against.
You don't even have to pick a DL.
Chart. Yeah.
Yeah. They're just answering the same question you ask every frame in combat, which is how well did you do?
Right. I like that. I hadn't thought about that, but that's interesting and simple, easy way to go about it.
Yeah. Everybody declares what they're trying to do, and then their role is how well did you do it?
Mhm. Yeah, because the dice are just a narrative prompt. I mean, they're re-engaging you with the fiction.
Exactly. You're a writer. Remember, you're in the writer's room. My players are creative geniuses. My job is not to limit their creative potential. Even if their character is failing at this moment, I want to give them more creative potential because it's interesting when characters fail. Let's see where this goes.
Well, and that's the other thing I like about the dice, because failing in and of itself is uninteresting. But yes and no, but, it gives you a range of possibilities that can happen. Succeed with a
Exactly.
failure or fail with kind of a partial success. It leads to more interesting stories. Failure can be interesting, right? Like, I charge the guy and, trip and fall down and, you get stabbed or whatever the fuck. Like, maybe that's interesting, leads to an interesting part of the story. But like in and of itself,
Well, you actually just added an and onto it.
well, that's yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Did
And,
I find the
that's-
thing?
yeah.
No. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Well, now what?
Right. Now
that's
you
one
either
of,
have to keep rolling the same thing over and over again, which is stupid, or you have to find some other skill, which in many games, what other skill? Oh my God, 4 skills.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the big things, and kind of brings me back to Core's just good GM advice, but on paper. Of one of the big questions that's always asked with traditional games is what do I do if my players just want to keep rolling the same thing, or what do I do if they fail? And the advice that's usually given is the fail forwards. Like, all right, well, they fail, but something else happens, right? Or, if they fail hard enough, well, then make something happen that makes them go somewhere else, right? And that's core. That's no and no but,
Well,
right
yeah,
there.
it's like story
okay,
happens.
you've
No matter
failed.
what happens, you're going to get story out of it. I want to try to keep
Exactly.
you creating story. So, in a way, as you watch any TV show, the hero's going to get in trouble. The hero's going to fuck up. The hero's going to be in the totally wrong place when the victim is like almost going to be raped. And oh my God, will he make it in time? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually good drama. We want that shit. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time. You just made it worse for yourself. We're only in Act 2. You need to make it worse for yourself. That's what's going to make it feel so good when we get to the end of Act 3, right? You want that stuff. So it's not about like, did you fail or did you succeed? It's about what kind of spin is it getting? Is it spinning up right now? Is it spinning down? Because that's right. The tension is it spinning up or is it spinning down? That's where the feelings are coming from. Mm-hmm. It's a fast pace or exciting, or is it slowing down? And you can feel that. And the GM, if he's looking at a circle or a timer, especially, can feel when it's time to ramp that up again. The players respond to it. It's. I can come up with terms and mechanics and everything, but ultimately this comes down to feeling it. And Core is trying to stay out of your way, so you can feel like if you're going with beats, go with beats. If you're going with mood, go with mood. If you're the kind of GM who wants to make sure that this clue is planted before that clue, I would say keep them mobile. That way you can sort of approach them in a core way, but let the players' feelings guide this. That's nobody ever remembers mechanics like years down the road. Nobody remembers it was brilliant that you created a system in which the dice mods were on the same scale as the dice. Nobody remembers that shit. They remember the way they felt when that thing in the story happened. And they looked so fucking badass and they saved everybody. That's what they remember. So I'm trying to create those dramatic moments. The numbers like almost don't matter. They're just there so that the moments will be even more dramatic. But they're just there to like tell you a prompt to get the fuck out of your way. What does this guy do next? Oh my God. Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like in the Day Trippers game, the firefight that Trey and Reggie were in, right? I can tell you I can tell you the story of what happened. I can't tell you the roles we made. Now, all right, I can, but that's kind of the part of Core, right? Is that I can I could probably, in telling you the story, retro engineer it and
A
say,
few.
okay,
Yeah,
these
you-
are
okay,
probably
that
the
had to be a
roles.
yes and.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, but I don't remember the role,
Like
the specific
when
roles
Nash
that we
came
made.
rolling in his car at just the exact right moment and shot the guy in the
Right.
open door of the van.
Yeah, but it's like I don't remember the roles that we make. I don't even remember when we roll necessarily, but I can tell you the story, and that's what counts.
Because
And that's
what you remember is what your mind is doing is like remembering the way that felt. And so the more strongly I can make you feel something, the deeper it's going to go, the easier it's going to be for you to remember. And then by telling the story over and over again, you re-stimulate that. Just like a real memory, your brain, this is kind of scary thing about the human brain, right? Your reactive mind doesn't know whether it's responding to something fictional or something real.
Yep.
If it has an emotional effect, it has an emotional effect. That's why fiction works. That's why we spend so much money going to movies and shit. Right?
Yeah.
Because your mind
that's
doesn't.
the thing,
Your mind doesn't know that that's not real. I mean, he left her, and now he's going to Spain, and I'm crying. These aren't even real people. I'm fucking crying.
Yeah, and I mean that's ultimately the thing with core that I love is that for me, rolling dice and everything like that breaks telling the story in the moment. It's a pause in the narrative, and it's a pause in the collective storytelling. And so the less rolling that you can do to get the most effect is what happens. If I can roll once to explain an hour's worth the events, that's fine by me.
And that's why the bipartite answer. I mean, yeah, binaries are boring, but this is also just a matter of oomph. Okay, because I know every time you roll the dice, I've lost 1 point of immersion. So I want to be sure that rolling the dice gives me back at least 2 points of immersion.
Yeah. And that's why I really like too about what you've done with the frames is that in pretty much every other system that you play with, when it talks about turns or anything like that or rounds, it's a specific point of time. Right? You're dealing with 5 seconds or 6 seconds or 10 seconds or 3 seconds, right? Frames are modular, right? It all depends on what you're dealing with at that moment in time. A frame could be an hour, a frame could be a day, a frame could be 2 seconds.
Yeah, and again, cinematic logic, right?
Exactly.
Because we don't really, I mean, we know it's unrealistic, but we still let it go. When you're watching a thing on TV and there's a firefight and they're shooting each other back and forth and the heroes are running behind, here's her gun, and he tosses her the gun and she's running over there and like there's this emotional exchange where he goes, I've always known you love me, baby. And for that moment, like it took him 5 seconds to say that and for her to get watery-eyed and say, I know, and pat him on the cheek. Like no one was shooting at him for 5 seconds while we had this little emotional exchange. Right? And we let it happen. We let it go. Because that's narrative logic right there. That's what they did this scene.
Yeah, everything drills down on that one moment and everything else.
Yeah, so like
fades.
it's like really that conversation was actually in between shots. Like the enemy were busy reloading, I guess. I don't know. We just let it go.
Right.
Because it doesn't matter. Was it, well, wait a minute, but he was shooting like once every half. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter because this is what the hero wanted to do right now. This is what a scene is. It's 5 seconds of looking into her eyes. That's what this scene is.
Yep. All right. Do we want to? Do you have anything you want to like throw out to like wrap us up in a neat bow? Because we could. I mean, we could do this for another 3 hours. Probably.
We could do this forever. Well, listen. Here's the thing, man. I just wanted to tell, or to rather, let stories emerge in as flexible and creative a way as possible. And I've stripped everything down to this system I call Core Micro. For me, I mean, it's free or it's pay what you want. But for me, the big jolly, the big thrill. I mean, I'm not planning on getting rich off a Core, but it's kind of like kind of like some writers enjoy seeing fan art. Like I'm one of those, right? I'm going to be really, really happy the first time I go to drive through and I see a core product that someone wrote who I've never heard of. Or if I go to Reddit and someone's talking about their core world and I have no idea who this person is. So for me, that's the next step. I think that with you guys and the playtests that you've done, and if we count it up, think of how the hundreds of hours John and Jesse, but especially John, because he does the editing and the setup and everything, have spent basically making sure that Day Trippers and then core is as nice and tight and flexible as it could possibly be, and helping it get out there and then creating worlds for it. I think we've taken it like up, like a whole level, right? We leveled up. And now the next level is you people out there building worlds that we here have nothing to do with. That's what I want to see.
Absolutely.
Make more games so that I have more mechanics to put into Megamon.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we're working on a core noir game, which we'll see whether or not that works as a whole setting. We are gonna run it with core micro. I mean, that's how we're gonna start this out. We're starting next week. I don't know when it's gonna release on MFGcast, but we're recording our first session next week. And you can run it with that. What we want to try to do is make mechanics that fit in a noir setting and then see whether or not that stuff all shakes out. Now, maybe somebody beats us to it. Open challenge to somebody who wants to create a core noir world before we can lock it all down. But in a very real way, it's like core is similar to Savage Worlds or Cypher System in that you can run anything. You may need to pull in specific things or create specific mechanics. Like for Cthulhu, it was the shock, it was the trauma, and you could, we probably could have just, fudged it with psyche rolls, right? I mean, we didn't have to have a whole other mechanic for it, but I think it makes it better, right? It makes it tighter, it makes it more germane. It makes the world a little bit, larger and more fulfilling, I guess. So we want to try to do that with noir, and of course, I'm working on the wushu thing too on the side. This group may put out another 4 settings.
Right, I just got two more stupid ideas while we were just talking for the last 3 hours. So
yeah, but hopefully we've got a Discord, which I don't know that I put the link in the show notes. I'll have to go back and do that. But we have a Discord. We've got a subreddit. There's a Facebook page. There's Twitter. You could follow all of us. We're always talking about core. We've got a 4-year campaign of Day Trippers, which is all core, run by the master himself. Mm-hmm. So if you want to see how core is meant to be run, it is literally, I've said it before, it is the best game I have ever played in, ever. It's phenomenal. And a good portion of that
because
is
I've got you fully immersed in a psychic bond.
Yep, and playing with good players like Jesse and John. I mean, it's phenomenal. If you never listen to anything we ever put out, God, listen to the Day Trippers game. It's the best. It's literally the best. It's a great story.
You know what's really great about the Day Trippers? I mean, it's so long, and you want to tell people what's a good episode to wade in, and it's oh man, it's so hard. There's so many, and it's complicated. There's story, care, plot, develop, all of this relationships going on. But really, just listen to the first episode, but you listen to it all the way through, please, because when it starts out, you're gonna think you know what this is. And by the time it's done, you're either a Day Trippers fan or you're not. You will know. Because it's not what you think it is when it starts.
What's funny, too, is I actually, a few months ago, went back and re-listened to the first episode. And that exact thing, I've listened to the whole thing. I've experienced it from beginning to end or beginning to current and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, like my concept of what the first few episodes were was completely different when I actually went back and re-listened to it. And I was like, oh yeah, this got way heavier way earlier than I thought.
Yeah, exactly. It
And
starts
not
off
only
here, you're like,
that-
I've seen this movie 100 times before, you know, and by like an hour in, you're like, wait a minute, what?
Yep.
and for a 4-year campaign, there are so many elements in the first episode
Oh,
that
absolutely.
have bore fruit through 4 fucking seasons.
Yep.
Sure, man.
That
I
you would
reuse
never, like-
everything. I am
Oh,
frugal, if nothing else.
Yeah.
I reuse
Reduce,
everything.
reuse, recycle.
That's me, man.
Yep.
All right. Well,
I can
we're
suck
gonna-
meaning out of a bone everyone else has forgotten about for 2 years.
You're the hyena of GM.
That may be true.
All right, well, we're going to wrap this up. We want to thank everybody for checking it out. If you have any post-show core questions, you can hit us up, any of us on Twitter or, legendsoftabletop@gmail.com or, reach out, whatever, the Facebook page. Thank you for checking it out. We have coffee for sale, as always. If you use code LEGENDS10, you're going to get 10% off your order. Shipping is always free. You order that sweet legendary brew. It's a nice, easy drinking medium roast. So a little bit of the money comes back to the show, helps pay for the SoundCloud and all that sort of stuff. It's good coffee. I just put in an order in real time. Anybody that's listening to this, it's hopefully on its way. I don't know. So I don't have to buy backup coffee because it's literally the only thing I drink these days. It's fantastic.
Right on.
Roasted by GM Neil. I think everybody here has probably had it.
Oh, yeah.
The other brews are also fantastic as well. You don't get any money from that, but you still get the discount. You still get the free shipping. If you want to try some of the other brews, I suggest that as well. They're all fantastic. Ratings, reviews on iTunes or whatever your podcatcher of choice is. Super helpful. There's a link in the show notes for all the hottest core things. Please go and check that out as well. If you're going to buy any of the core products, buy Core Micro. It's kind of the reason why we're all sort of doing this. So, put your money over there. We're just fucking around. This is, Todd's gig. So spend money over there. Patreons, if you're inclined to throw some cash at us, again, throw cash at Todd. We have a Patreon. It doesn't matter. We're going to just record because it's whatever. So, yay.
We're
support.
spiteful.
Cool. Spiteful. Peace out.
Peace.
Thank y'all.